Chapter 291. After putting down the phone, Poplar Fruit briefly explained He Wenjua's background to Chen Longjiang. Usually, he wouldn't mention it to anyone. Even his best friend, Song Jiwen, only knew that Poplar Fruit had a friend in the army. He didn't know that He Wenjua's father had such a high position. It didn't matter if he told Chen Longjiang at this time, because Chen Longjiang had met He Wenjua at the same time as he and He Wenjua. Moreover, Chen Longjiang had put in so much effort on this matter, so he should understand the situation. I didn't expect little he to have such a big background. Chen Longjiang didn't lose his composure. His family's background was quite strong. Although he still had to look up to He Wenjua's father, it wasn't to the extent that he was weak to the bone. Then it's easy to handle. Chen Longjiang organized his thoughts and analyzed it for Poplar Fruit. If Commander, he helps you when the time comes, the other party should give you face. What we need to do now is drag it out for a few days. What should we do? Poplar Fruit asked. Should I call Yang Ping too? She's in charge of all the business matters now. After Yang Ping carried Kiki in, Poplar Fruit took some time to explain the current situation to Yang Ping. In order to not let this dark matter disturb Kiki, she was too smart. Poplar Fruit was worried that she might be able to understand now. Poplar Fruit even hugged Kiki and covered her ears with his hands. Yang Ping was shocked at first, but then she became worried. She wasn't worried about whether the business would be destroyed. She only said worriedly, Fruit, don't worry about the business. If the business is gone, as long as the people are fine, we can still continue. Now it's your problem. That person is coming for you. Will they frame you? They won't, right? Poplar Fruit said uncertainly. I don't think so. Chen Longjiang interrupted. If they want to frame Poplar Fruit, they would have done it in Yangcheng a long time ago. Targeting your family's business, the other party's intention to retaliate, is even more obvious. Even if they want to frame you, Chen Longjiang said confidently, you don't have to worry. On my land, they can't possibly frame people so casually. If you want to arrest someone, you need at least a reason. We have people in the Public Security Bureau and acquaintances in the city. Don't worry. Yang Ping nodded and continued to ask, Secretary Chen, what do you think we should do? For the next few days, the factories and shops should keep a low profile. If they don't make a move in the next few days, it will be fine. But if they do, don't panic. Chen Longjiang said, it's just a small loss and a small problem. Let them handle it. Even if you're sealed, don't get into a conflict with the law enforcers. Poplar Fruit and Yang Ping listened attentively. They nodded as they listened. Only Kiki shook her head as she felt uncomfortable with her father's hand covering her ears. Of course, before that, you have to go back and check if there are any possible security loopholes or hygiene problems. Try not to let them catch you. Chen Longjiang added, let them do whatever they want. After a few days, Xiao Yang's friend will come back. He will help to find someone to solve this matter. In case, I'm just saying in case, Chen Longjiang chuckled. If the standing committee doesn't have enough face, then let's not care about this business. We can earn it back in the future. Where there's life, there's life. Don't you think so? If Big Brother he can't do it, Secretary Chen, you don't have to get involved, Poplar Fruit said seriously. You have to protect yourself first. Don't do anything because of me. Don't worry. Chen Longjiang smiled and patted Poplar Fruit's shoulder gently. He said, my family has some connections. They don't have any deep hatred, so they can't touch me easily. What are you guys whispering about inside? Chongguan sent Xiaoyu back. At this time, Feng Yuqing knocked on the door, then pushed the door open and said, you're busy with work during the day, and now you can't even rest at night? Haha, it's okay. We've finished talking. Let's go out. Chen Longjiang patted Poplar Fruit's shoulder and laughed. Poplar Fruit was much taller than him, so he couldn't do more difficult actions. Sister Hua made some sugar water. Everyone come and have some. Feng Yuqing led the way and said with a smile. On the way back, Poplar Fruit told Yang Chongguan about the incident again, and then said solemnly, Sister, brother-in-law, I'm sorry. I've dragged you into such a dangerous situation. How can you take all the blame? Yang Ping retorted. You don't even know who did it. Maybe it's a lunatic who doesn't like everyone, and you just happen to run into him. Poplar Fruit, Don't talk about your business and my business. Yang Chongwan, who had been listening quietly, said, "We're a family. Whatever happens, we should face it together. You used your connections to help us set up this business. Even if it's all ruined, don't feel bad. Yeah, we've already earned back the money we've earned in the past few months." Yang Ping laughed. "Don't talk about money. It's not about money." At this time, Yang Chongwan said very unyieldingly, "Even if our family goes bankrupt, we won't let that bully have his way. He wants us to admit defeat and lose our business, but we can't admit defeat to him. Okay, don't be so stubborn." Yang Ping didn't know whether to laugh or cry, and said, "I know you're hot-blooded." Secretary Chun said that we should keep a low profile during this period of time. After this period of time, we still have hope. Yes, 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 my wife is right. Yang Chongwan nodded and said, "What we're doing is called, when the enemy retreats, we advance. When the enemy advances, we retreat. You're using guerrilla warfare? Why don't you bring up your great-grandfather?" Yang Ping patted him and laughed. "Drive carefully. Be careful at night." Poplar Fruit sat in the passenger seat and smiled, watching the couple bicker. After a long time, he said softly, "Seriously, thank you." "I'm serious too." Yang Chongwan laughed and said, "Can we not be so polite?" Okay, stop talking." Yang Ping hissed in the back. "Kiki's eyes are sleepy. She wants to sleep." The car suddenly fell into silence, just like the quiet night outside. The county road without streetlights was as dark as ink. The Land Rover, like a wild beast, was running on the road with two huge headlights. There was no companion, only the dull roar of the engine. Although the night in the suburbs was scary, Poplar Fruit was not afraid, because the reflection in the car window was his brother-in-law's figure, which was illuminated by the dashboard. He could also hear the rustling sound of his sister coaxing Kiki to sleep. The car was driving towards the bright and warm home. Chapter 292. Poplar Fruit gave the car keys to Yang Chongwan so that it would be convenient for them to go back tomorrow. The day after tomorrow was Kiki's birthday. Poplar Fruit didn't want to cause any more trouble. Early the next morning, Yang Chongwan hurriedly drove back to the county with Yang Ping. Third, granduncle helped to look after the factory. Moreover, it was in the countryside far away from the emperor. As long as they didn't cause any trouble, there wouldn't be any problems. They were mainly worried about the main store in the county. It was too big a target. Poplar Fruit asked them to go back and check it. If they were still worried, they might as well close the store for a few days. In the past, Yang Tai and Su Jinfeng didn't care much about Poplar Fruit's birthday, or even Yang Lingju's birthday now. In the past, people in the countryside were busy with farm work. It was good enough to take care of 3 meals. How would they have the leisure to celebrate a birthday? However, when it came to Poplar Fruit's generation, they came into contact with the popular culture in the provincial capital. They began to feel that birthdays were worth commemorating. Moreover, it was Kiki's first birthday. Poplar Fruit made up his mind to celebrate Kiki's birthday with a grand celebration. The sun was still leisurely resting on the treetops in the east. Poplar Fruit drove his mother to the market in the village to buy some birthday items. Kiki was wearing a small flower cap. She was being carried by her grandmother behind her father's back. The whistling morning wind made her small face tremble and her mouth twitch. Chi-Chi's originally strong drowsiness disappeared in an instant. Actually, Chi-Chi quite liked this feeling. One could tell just by looking at her narrowed eyes. The Land Rover was very cool, and it ran much faster than a motorcycle. However, it lacked the feeling of being as fast as lightning. Everyone who liked to go for a ride knew that just admiring the scenery passing by quickly could not compare to the feeling of speed when the wind blew on one's face. However, the market in the village wasn't far. The motorcycle only took about 10 minutes to reach it. Poplar Fruit parked his car in front of an acquaintance's shop in the village and asked him to take care of it. Then he parted ways with his mother. Su Jinfeng rushed to the morning market to buy groceries, while Poplar Fruit carried Kiki to buy other things. Although the quality of the items in the various department stores in the countryside was somewhat poor, they had a wide variety of products. Thousands of products were hung on the shelves, and there were also a few rows of cardboard boxes on the ground. If a person were to walk in the store, it would be a problem to turn around and let them pass. Fortunately, Poplar Fruit was not here to buy things that could be used for a long time. He mainly wanted to buy some small toys, such as a pocket abacus toy, a small ruler, a small crayon, a small seal, and so on. All of them were for Zhou. The custom of Zhou in Guangdong province was not strong. Poplar Fruit also followed the custom and bought according to the book. Although Zhou was actually a superstition and had little to do with a child's future, Poplar Fruit felt that this custom could be considered as a memento for Kiki's birthday. In the future, when Kiki grew up, Poplar Fruit would tell her these interesting things when she was young. That would be an indescribable joy. After buying these, Poplar Fruit went to look for a cake shop in the market. There were cake shops, but don't underestimate the spending power of rural people. Poplar Fruit saw 2 groups of people coming to place orders in just 10 minutes in a cake shop. However, Poplar Fruit still gave up because he carefully looked at the cake in the shop. The workmanship was really bad. He guessed that the owner worked outside and came back after learning half of it. The cream was spread in layers and was too uneven. The most important thing was that the quality of the cake in the shop seemed to be very unreliable. Poplar Fruit thought about it and decided to look at the situation. He would ask his brother-in-law to bring a cake back from the county tomorrow, or he would buy one himself. At least, he would not have a stomachache. Speaking of food, Poplar Fruit felt that he was hungry. He went out in the morning without breakfast. When he smelled some cooked food in the market, Poplar Fruit's stomach growled. "Kiki, let's go eat, okay?" Poplar Fruit asked with a smile. Kiki, who was looking around for fresh food, immediately turned her head to look at them when she heard that. She licked her mouth with her small tongue, clapped her small hands, and said, "Okay, okay." 2 pulled sausages, 1 with meat, 1 with eggs, and 1 without. Poplar Fruit came to a rice noodle roll stand and sat down, speaking to the owner in his hometown dialect. "Okay, wait a moment." The owner was a thick-waisted woman. She rolled up her sleeves and pulled the steaming steamer. Her hands were busy, but her mouth did not stop. She said with a smile, "You brought your daughter to the market? Your child is very cute." "Yes, thank you," Poplar Fruit said with a smile. "Pop, it smells so good," Kiki said while holding her father's arm. She did not understand what her father said, but it was normal. Her father often changed his language at home, and she was used to it. The steam from the rice noodle roll stand was mixed with the tempting smell of minced meat. Kiki could not help swallowing her saliva. "Didn't the child grow up here?" The woman asked in surprise when she heard Kiki's childish voice, but it was quite standard Mandarin. "Yes, this time I brought her back to my hometown to play," Poplar Fruit said with a smile. The first rice noodle roll was soon served. It was the one without eggs. The white rice noodle roll, the bulging minced meat, and the fresh green lettuce were neatly cut. Then, with the sauce that had been prepared beforehand, the rich smell of the steaming rice noodle roll was very appetizing. The rice noodle roll in Guangdong province was very famous. In Poplar Fruit's hometown, although the rice noodle roll was not the most authentic, it still occupied a very important position in Poplar Fruit's memory because of the genuine weight and the minced meat that filled the whole rice noodle roll. "I haven't eaten it for a long time, but I miss it when I smell it." Poplar Fruit gave the woman a thumbs up and said with a smile, "Haha, do you want a prawn sausage?" The woman laughed and said, "It's our local prawns. I guarantee that you will eat one and one more." "Okay, then I'll add one more." Poplar Fruit had not started eating yet, but said with pride. He did not plan to eat it himself. Poplar Fruit picked up a small piece of rice noodle roll mixed with minced meat, dipped it in the sauce, and blew on it with his mouth. Kiki was already moaning at the side. Poplar Fruit said with a smile, "What's the hurry? If it's cold, I'll give it to you now." Poplar Fruit put the rice noodle roll into Kiki's mouth, which was already wide open. Kiki immediately sucked on the chopsticks and closed her mouth. Poplar Fruit took out the chopsticks, and Kiki began to eat. "Eat slowly, chew before swallowing," Poplar Fruit said with a smile. "Is it good?" Kiki did not answer, and nodded her head with her small mouth moving. Poplar Fruit picked up another piece of rice noodle roll with egg and began to eat. Kiki anxiously finished the rice noodle roll in her mouth and impatiently pulled on her father's clothes and shouted, "More, more." looking at her anxious appearance. It was as if she was afraid that if she was slow, her father would eat her portion as well. Chapter 293. After eating the rice noodle roll, Poplar Fruit carried the satisfied Kiki back to the motorbike. He sat on it and waited for Sue Jean Phone to come back. Sue Jean Phone was famous for being slow when buying groceries. Not only did she like to bargain, but she would also find an excuse not to buy after bargaining. She would only make a final decision after shopping around. Therefore, Poplar Fruit still had time to answer a phone call. In this call, Poplar Fruit heard bad news. It wasn't from Yang Ping, but from Song Jiwen. Just after exchanging a few words with Song Jiwen, Poplar Fruit's face sank. What did you just say? Poplar Fruit's hand, that was holding the phone, almost crushed it. I said, weren't we going to deal with that bastard Liang Zhenglin? In the end, he slipped away. Song Jiwen sighed and repeated. It wasn't exactly a slip away. It was just that after our matter was left unsettled, he swaggered back to the company. Song Jiwen said while gritting his teeth. Before Poplar Fruit returned to his hometown, he asked Song Jiwen to help him teach Liang Zhenglin a lesson. And this lesson was that the relevant departments of industry and commerce, tax, public security, fire, and so on took turns to take action, forcing him to shut down the startup company that he was so proud of. Even the day before yesterday, the progress was very smooth. Song Jiwen's call to Poplar Fruit was all good news. He even happily told Poplar Fruit that his friend found evidence that Liang Zhenglin used unqualified ingredients to make cosmetics during a surprise inspection. With this evidence, even if Liang Zhenglin didn't die, he would lose a layer of skin. Poplar Fruit was also relieved. Then, last night, he was discussing the family business with Yang Chongwan and the others. He didn't even have the time to ask about Song Jiwen's progress. As a result, Song Jiwen angrily called him today and told him that things were messed up. How could this be? Poplar Fruit frowned and asked, puzzled, didn't we already get the evidence to convict him? Song Jiwen sighed and said, he has someone backing him. My buddies couldn't do anything. They all received a notice not to investigate further. Someone backing him? Poplar Fruit's eyes widened. Then, he thought carefully and asked, how is that possible? How could he be so miserable if he had someone backing him? In the beginning, Liang Zhenglin was indeed very miserable. His company was investigated and shut down. The account books were directly brought to the bureau for questioning. He was caught by the police when he was dealing with the evidence in a panic. He was in the police station for 2 to 3 days. If he had someone backing him, why didn't he use it when he was crying for his parents? Poplar Fruit was really puzzled by Liang Zhenglin's strange and shocking turnaround. Not only did he get out of the detention room, but he also tore off the company seal and reopened for business. I don't know. When I investigated him, I didn't find out that he had any backing. Anyway, there was suddenly a very powerful person. I know who he is. He went to talk to the director of my buddies, and then my buddies were all scolded. Song Jiwen said unwillingly, my dad too. When he came back last night, he told me, and you to keep a low profile. A very powerful person? Poplar Fruit felt that something was wrong. He hurriedly asked, does Godfather know who it is? I asked, but he said he didn't know. Song Jiwen sighed and said, anyway, with my dad's status, he can't see the person in person. Poplar Fruit was silent. His body's breath was a little chaotic. Kiki felt it. She looked up at her father uneasily and held her father's left hand tightly in her arms. Do you know something? Song Jiwen felt that Poplar Fruit's reaction was a little strange and asked, I don't know. It was like this yesterday. Poplar Fruit told Song Jiwen the news that Chen Longjiang had told him yesterday. Then he said, I really don't remember offending that big shot. It's okay. What are you afraid of? Song Jiwen showed his keen political sense at this time and comforted him. Didn't you just say that your brother's father, is he Jioming? He's a big shot. As long as you ask him to come forward, what problem can't be solved? Don't worry. Wait patiently for 2 more days. The truth will definitely come out. Well, that's the only way. Poplar Fruit sighed and said, you should be careful too. Don't get yourself into trouble because of me. You don't have to worry about me. Song Jiwen said indifferently, my position is low. No matter how much trouble they cause, they won't be able to trouble me. After putting down the phone, Poplar Fruit's mood didn't improve. His face was still a little gloomy. The feeling of being inexplicably dealt with was too sullen. Moreover, he didn't know who the enemy was. Even if he had strength, there was nowhere to use it. He could only helplessly wait for bad news to come. Poplar Fruit clenched his fist hard. However, he soon couldn't hold it any longer because Chi-Chi had grabbed his clenched fist and pulled it apart forcefully. E. Kiki clenched her teeth hard and made some noise from the corner of her mouth. She felt her father's irritation and his fist was full of anger. She tried to release this anger from her father's hand so that her father wouldn't continue to be unhappy. "What are you doing?" Looking at his daughter's action, Poplar Fruit's depression suddenly dissipated by half. He was stunned for a moment. He smiled and pulled out his right fist. He stretched it out and turned it into a big palm. He gently stroked Kiki's silky hair. Woo-woo. Kiki turned around to face her father. Then, with a cry, she plunged into her father's stomach. Her pair of small arms grew very big. However, she still couldn't hug her father's waist. She was still too small. Okay. Why are you acting like a spoiled child? Poplar Fruit laughed and hugged Kiki. He pressed his forehead against Kiki's little head and kissed her little mouth intimately. Kiki giggled. Then, she realized that she was suddenly attacked. She suddenly covered her eyes with her hands and blushed shyly. Looking at his cute daughter, Poplar Fruit's unhappiness finally disappeared. Perhaps it was only temporary, but it was enough. Hey, what are you doing on the street? Su Jinfeng's loud voice suddenly rang in Poplar Fruit's ears. Only then did Poplar Fruit realize that his mother was standing beside him with big and small bags. That's all you bought? Su Jinfeng put the meat and vegetables in order into the trunk of the motorcycle. In the end, she couldn't fit them all in, so she carried some in her hand. Didn't you say that you wanted to buy a cake? I didn't find any good ones. I'll ask my brother-in-law to buy some later. Poplar Fruit smiled and turned the motorcycle around with one hand. Su Jinfeng strode onto the motorcycle and carried Kiki over. She held her with one hand and carried a lively duck with the other. Kiki's eyes lit up. She stuck her head out and her attention was attracted by the duck. Chapter 294. Back home, Poplar Fruit rumbled his motorcycle into the yard, only to find that there was a guest in the house. These 2 days, the guests in the house had not stopped coming. People came and went in the village. Poplar Fruit often gave the children more expensive chocolate candy, so barefooted children often came to the house. However, Poplar Fruit did not expect this unexpected guest. Herong, why are you here? I heard that you want to work in Guan City. Poplar Fruit stopped the motorcycle and turned the key while asking. Young Herong and Poplar Fruit were only 2 months apart in age. Poplar Fruit was even older than him. Although they both had the surname Yang, the two people were not family. Or it could be said that as early as 100 years ago, the two Yangs were divided into 2 clans, and their ancestral temples were not in the same place. Although the two people were similar in age, they had never played together since childhood. In elementary school, it was Poplar Fruit who beat Yang Herong. In junior high school, it was Yang Herong who beat Poplar Fruit. The two people had been fighting since childhood. As for high school, the two people had already walked on 2 different paths. Their opportunities and development were no longer on the same line. Poplar Fruit's grades in junior high school were very good. In high school, he directly went to the city to study. After the college entrance examination, he was the first person in their village to be admitted to a major university. After college, there was no need to talk about him. The reason why Yang Herong was able to bully Yang Guo in junior high school was because he didn't learn to be good since junior high school. Every day, he would mix around with a bunch of hooligans in the village. Fighting was a common occurrence, and he would often steal the scrap metal from the failed state-owned factories to sell for money. Every day, he skipped classes and did not go to school. After junior high school, Yang Herong simply did not go to school. He went even further and mingled with the underworld. Smoking, drinking, eating, drinking, whoring, gambling, which was not good to learn. Every year when Poplar Fruit came back, he could hear people in the village sighing about Yang Herong's misdeeds. He ate and drank at home, and was lazy to do work. He was unwilling to go with his parents to farm. Because of fighting and slashing people, he had been sent to the police station 2 or 3 times. His family had to pay a lot of money to get him out. The only change was at the beginning of this year, when he finally couldn't stand the nagging of his old mother at home. So he kicked open the door and ran to Guan City to work. There were as many factories in Guan City as there were hairs on an ox, so there was no shortage of opportunities for such young people to work. So he quickly found an assembly line job. Although there was no money to send home, at least she had changed her appearance. Her family was very gratified. Although the relationship between Poplar Fruit and Yang Hairong's family wasn't very good, Poplar Fruit was still able to obtain some information from the words of the visiting villagers. Poplar Fruit was somewhat puzzled by the fact that a person who usually didn't greet him, who should be working in Guan City, actually appeared in his home with a bag of fruit. However, looking at his father, Yang Tai, who was silently smoking his hookah, Poplar Fruit guessed that they certainly didn't have any topics to talk about. Seeing Poplar Fruit, Yang Hairong also stood up. Although he didn't study well, he was tall and sturdy. Although he certainly couldn't be compared to Poplar Fruit, his height of 1.78 meters was also outstanding in the village. Yang Hairong usually didn't get along with Poplar Fruit, but at this time he said with a smile, "I just came back to see." He wasn't very good at pretending. Poplar Fruit felt that this smile was fake. It was basically a fake smile. Su Jinfeng held Kiki in one hand and the duck in the other hand. Poplar Fruit parked the motorcycle and then got down to help his mother take the vegetables and other things from the trunk. He politely greeted Yang Hairong. "Hairong, when did you come back? Have you eaten lunch?" I ate. Yang Hairong stood in the same place and laughed. "By the way, Poplar Fruit," Yang Hairong rubbed his hands and asked, "I heard my mother say that your family opened a factory." "Yes." Poplar Fruit put down the things and turned around. "I heard that your factory pays 2,000 yuan a month." Yang Hairong laughed. "I don't know if you're still hiring." Poplar Fruit frowned and asked, "We're still hiring. Why? Do you want to join?" "Yes." Yang Hairong quickly replied, "You said that we brothers grew up together." Poplar Fruit still frowned and asked, "Aren't you doing well in Guan City? Besides, as far as I know, the wages paid to workers in Guan City aren't low. 3,000 yuan a month is more than enough. Why do you want to come back?" "Hey." Yang Hairong clapped his hands and said, "Poplar Fruit, you don't know. The work in Guan City isn't for people to do. It's so boring, and I have to work 6 days a week. The money I earn isn't enough for me to go to the bar with my friend." Poplar Fruit's frown deepened. He silently looked at Yang Hairong and didn't speak. "I can also show filial piety to my parents when I come back." Yang Hairong talked about the hardships in Guan City and the benefits of coming back. Then he said with a flattering smile, "And with our relationship, plus my experience in Guan City, if I join your family's factory, I'll have to start as a supervisor. The salary will definitely be high." "Ha!" Yang Hairong laughed dryly. Poplar Fruit was also angered by him. He sneered and asked, "What's our relationship?" As soon as this sentence came out, Yang Hairong's smile froze. Poplar Fruit didn't give him any face and said, "Let's not talk about the relationship. You tell me, with such a person, do you think I would dare to let you enter my factory? Lazy, afraid of hardships, and tiring." Yang would count it with her fingers and said, "You've only been working in Guan City for a short time, yet you're already complaining about this and that. When you're tired, you come back to my family's factory. Is my family's factory more leisurely than the one in Guan City? Oh, I'm sorry, but my family's factory really can't afford to raise idle people. Besides, you want to be a supervisor? That's simply a joke." Poplar Fruit laughed and said, "Do you have the ability and quality to be a supervisor? Do you have the ability to coordinate, handle things calmly, and dare to take responsibility? Don't mention your experience to me. In my opinion, the experience of working in an assembly line for a few months is not worth mentioning." Yang Hairong's face turned red. Looking at Poplar Fruit, he couldn't lift his face and said, "But we're from the same village." "That also depends on the situation." Poplar Fruit felt that he had just said a bit too much. He shook his head and said, "If you're willing to work hard, then we'll give you face, but you still can't meet our requirements. I suggest you go back to Guan City and gain experience for a few more years. When your temperament is stable, then come back to me. I don't need you to be long-winded about my affairs." With a low roar, Yang Hairong felt that he no longer had the face to stay in Poplar Fruit's house. He reached out and picked up the fruit he brought and walked out without lowering his head. The moment he brushed past Su Jinfeng, who was carrying Chi-Chi, Yang Hairong abruptly stopped in his tracks. Chapter 295. Ha! Yang Hairong turned around and tilted his head. His eyes were full of mockery as he said softly, "Poplar Fruit, you said that I'm useless and lazy. How good are you? We're all poor people born in the countryside. Don't think that you're so great just because you've been studying for 2 years." Yang Hairong's voice suddenly became louder. "You're just a fucking gigolo who sells his ass." Poplar Fruit's face was a little ugly, but before he could say anything, Yang Hairong suddenly reached out and pinched Kiki's little face. He shook Kiki and shouted loudly, "Fuck, you think you're so great just because you're rich? Didn't you just cheat a rich woman?" He pinched Kiki's face for only a moment. Poplar Fruit and Su Jinfeng didn't react for a moment. Instead, Kiki opened her mouth and cried out in pain. Hearing his daughter's cry, Poplar Fruit's eyes instantly turned red. Poplar Fruit saw Su Jinfeng slap Yang Hairong's hand away and protect Kiki behind her. Then she screamed and scolded, "Lai Hairong, what are you doing?" Poplar Fruit had just rushed up and pushed Yang Hairong. He didn't have time to deal with Yang Hairong. He quickly took his mother's hand and checked on Kiki, who was crying uncontrollably. 2 long bruises appeared on Kiki's originally white and smooth left face, and they were swelling at a speed visible to the naked eye. Fuck! Yang Hairong was pushed by Poplar Fruit and almost fell. He felt very embarrassed and cursed. He threw the bag of oranges on the ground. Several oranges rolled out on the ground. Yang Hairong kicked away the oranges in front of him. He rolled up his sleeves and wanted to say something to Poplar Fruit. He gently caressed Chi-Chi's face, but Chi-Chi's crying became more and more intense, and the swelling on her face became more and more obvious. The anger in Yang's heart became more and more intense. He suddenly turned his head, and his blood-red eyes stared at Yang Hairong. A tyrannical aura exploded in front of Yang Hairong like a fierce tiger. Seeing Poplar Fruit's eyes, Yang Hairong's legs almost went soft, and his knees almost fell. He pointed at Poplar Fruit and stammered, "Pretty boy, what the fuck are you looking at?" A trace of anger flashed across Poplar Fruit's face. He stuffed Kiki into his mother's arms and walked towards Yang Hairong step by step. With every step he took, it was as if the earth was shaking and the mountains were shaking. His aura was getting more and more intense. Yang Hairong had been fighting since he was young. He had even used a knife to cut people. He thought that he was not afraid of anything. When he saw Poplar Fruit walking towards him, his legs actually trembled. However, this action was too embarrassing in his eyes. Who was Poplar Fruit? He was just a bookworm. Ever since he joined the society, he had never taken Poplar Fruit seriously. Suppressing the inexplicable fear in his heart, Yang Hairong cursed and slapped Poplar Fruit's head. However, his right hand fell directly into Poplar Fruit's hand. Poplar Fruit's hand was like an iron clamp. He pulled Yang Hairong's right hand up and then kicked Yang Hairong in the stomach. Poplar Fruit did not use any martial arts or fighting skills at all. He just relied on his reaction and strength to move and kick. Even so, Yang Hairong was not Poplar Fruit's opponent at all. He was kicked in the stomach by Poplar Fruit. At the same time, his right hand that was being controlled suddenly loosened. Yang Hairong was kicked to the ground and rolled twice on the ground like an egg. "If you have something to say, come at me," Poplar Fruit roared. It was as if thunder had suddenly exploded out of nowhere. "Why did you touch my daughter? If anything happens to my daughter, I will kill you. You motherfucker." Yang Hairong was also stubborn. After rolling twice on the ground, he stood up with his head and face covered in dust. He picked up a brick from the ground and howled as he rushed at Poplar Fruit. He held the brick in his right hand and swung it high, smashing it at Poplar Fruit's head. In Poplar Fruit's view, Yang Hairong's wild boxing was full of loopholes. However, he was ruthless. He met the brick with a fist. In an instant, the brick was smashed into pieces by Poplar Fruit's fist. Yang Hairong was dumbfounded. Poplar Fruit kicked out again, kicking Yang Hairong and making him roll on the ground again. This time, Poplar Fruit did not give Yang Hairong a chance to breathe. Thinking of Kiki's face being strangely pinched by Yang Hairong, Poplar Fruit strode to Yang Hairong, who was still dizzy and in pain like a big prawn. He stretched out his right hand, grabbed Yang Hairong's collar, and directly lifted him up with one hand. The collar was not very comfortable, so Poplar Fruit directly clasped his neck and lifted him off the ground. Yang Hairong's face turned red from being suffocated by Poplar Fruit. He waved his hands, trying to grab at Poplar Fruit's face. Poplar Fruit gently lifted him up and then lifted him higher. Under the lack of oxygen, the veins on Yang Hairong's face bulged. His legs kicked weakly, and his hands tried to break free of Poplar Fruit's right hand. However, he could not break free of Poplar Fruit's iron grip. Poplar Fruit did not want to kill him. He just wanted to let him experience the feeling of suffocation. Before Yang Hairong could hold his neck and cough, Poplar Fruit used his left hand to pull him up from the ground. Poplar Fruit pulled Yang Hairong in front of him and stared at him fiercely with bloodshot eyes. Poplar Fruit was someone who had killed a few enemies. Under this imposing manner, Yang Hairong's eyes were full of fear and begging for mercy. However, how could Poplar Fruit let him off so easily? Kiki being bullied was the fuse, but the ignited explosive was also the pent-up depression in Poplar Fruit's heart for the past few days. Heartache, anger, oppression, and other emotions tangled together, and he finally exploded. Poplar Fruit tightly clenched his right fist and only extended his index finger, pointed at Yang Hairong, and said word by word, "Do you know? You shouldn't have touched my daughter. You touch my daughter, you touch my family. No matter where you are, I swear I will chase you to the ends of the earth to kill you." Suddenly, Poplar Fruit loosened his fist and, without warning, turned his fist into a palm and slapped down. Only a "pa" sound was heard, and Yang Hairong's head was tilted to the side. "This slap is for my daughter," Poplar Fruit said coldly, and loosened Yang Hairong's collar and threw him to the ground. There was no need to say how strong Poplar Fruit was. This slap almost caused Yang Hairong to have a concussion. Even so, after a while, Yang Hairong turned his head. His mouth was full of blood, and he spat out 2 teeth with a wah sound. Yang Hairong, who was scared by Poplar Fruit's slap, actually started to cry. However, his crying didn't receive any pity from Poplar Fruit and Su Jinfeng. Kiki's unstoppable crying made Su Jinfeng's heart ache. She comforted Kiki on the side and angrily scolded, "Serves you right, you deserve to die." Poplar Fruit kicked away Yang Hairong, who was covering his mouth and crying on the ground, and said coldly, "Scram, don't let me see you again." Yang Hairong was scared witless and scrambled out of Poplar Fruit's yard. Poplar Fruit's face softened, and he returned to Kiki's side with heartache and gently wiped away the tears on her face. Chapter 296. Kiki, don't cry. Tell me, does it hurt? Poplar Fruit's heart ached as he took his daughter from his mother's arms. Kiki directly hugged her biggest support, her father's neck. However, tears still flowed from her blurry eyes, and her sharp cries showed no signs of abating. Poplar Fruit's heart broke when he heard this. He gently patted his daughter's back and regretfully kissed his daughter's neck. His eyes were red as he said, "It's all my fault. I didn't protect Kiki well. It's all my fault. Is this Poplar Fruit's house? Excuse me." At this time, a female voice suddenly appeared at the door. However, Poplar Fruit's mind was focused on Kiki. He had his back to the door and didn't pay attention to it at all. Instead, it was Su Jinfeng who opened her eyes wide and looked at the door. She saw a tall girl with short hair appear at the door. She was holding a long box in one hand and dragging a small suitcase in the other. She was looking inside. Poplar Fruit? The tall girl with short hair saw Poplar Fruit's back and heard Kiki's cries. She raised her eyebrows and shouted loudly. Poplar Fruit also heard it at this time. He held Kiki and turned around. He blinked his eyes and couldn't believe that he saw Zhang Yujie, who should have been thousands of miles away. Uh-huh, I finally found her. Zhang Yujie happily waved at Poplar Fruit. Then, she carried the small suitcase and stepped over the door and walked in. Who is this girl? Su Jinfeng blankly asked in her hometown's dialect. However, Poplar Fruit didn't answer her, nor did he pay attention to Zhang Yujie who walked in. At this time, his heart was in pain. His mind was full of Kiki's bruised little face. He carried Kiki to sit on the rattan chair where Yang Tai often sat and only cared about comforting Kiki. Yang Tai pulled Yang Linjie and stood aside with Su Jinfeng. They didn't know what to do when they saw the beautiful and fashionable girl who came to their door. For Poplar Fruit's parents, Zhang Yujie's tall leather boots, tight leather pants, and slim jacket were really too fashionable. They had only seen such clothes on TV. Zhang Yujie's short hair and the pair of sunglasses on her forehead made her look very imposing. She immediately intimidated the two of them. Auntie, uncle. Zhang Yujie also saw that Kiki was crying very hard. She carefully and very politely asked, "What's wrong with Poplar Fruit? Why is Kiki crying so hard?" She also vaguely guessed that the two rural couples in front of her were very likely Poplar Fruit's parents. Although she was mentally prepared before she came, she didn't expect to meet Poplar Fruit and his family in such a tense atmosphere. After Zhang Yujie spoke, her heart actually beat very fast. Although Zhang Yujie didn't have an obvious Beijing accent, Yang Tai and the others still had a hard time understanding her strong Beijing accent. In the end, Su Jinfeng, who was better at Mandarin, answered, "Just now, a young man in the village pinched Kiki's face. Poplar Fruit is angry." "He hurt Kiki?" Zhang Yujie's eyebrows almost raised. She raised her voice and then became gentle again. She realized that it was not appropriate to be too manly in front of Poplar Fruit's parents at this time. She asked softly, "Who was it? Was it the person who just walked by, crying? I'll call the police to arrest him." "That's enough. Yujie, don't interfere." Poplar Fruit raised his head helplessly and said, "I just beat him up. We're all from the same village, so we see each other all the time." After that, he lowered his head again. While wiping Kiki's tears with his hand, he gently stroked the two blue marks on Kiki's face. Every time he touched them, Kiki couldn't help but tremble and then cry even harder. Poplar Fruit knew that it was very painful. He didn't dare to touch it again. His heart was in a mess, so he could only hug Kiki and comfort her. Zhang Yujie thought that Poplar Fruit was angry with her. When she saw Poplar Fruit talking to her, she breathed a sigh of relief. In her heart, she hated that embarrassed guy. She originally planned to give Poplar Fruit a surprise, but it was all ruined by him. "Miss." At this time, Su Jinfeng looked at Zhang Yujie, hesitated, and asked, "You are?" "Oh, I haven't introduced myself yet." Zhang Yujie quickly put the small suitcase aside and reached out her hand with a smile. "Hello, Auntie. My name is Zhang Yujie. I'm Poplar Fruit's friend. I'm here to celebrate Kiki's birthday." Hello. Su Jinfeng quickly shook Zhang Yujie's hand and said with a smile. Looking at Zhang Yujie's beautiful face and tall figure, her eyes became brighter and brighter. "Auntie, uncle, you two are Poplar Fruit's mother and father, right?" Zhang Yujie acted very obedient and asked sweetly. "Yes." Yang Tai was a man of few words. Su Jinfeng answered with a smile. "Ha, miss, please sit." After saying this, Su Jinfeng found that there were no other chairs in the yard. She quickly kicked Yang Tai and said in her hometown language, "Old man, hurry up and get a chair." Zhang Yujie curiously watched as Yang Tai went into the house and brought out a few plastic stools. She quickly ran over to help. "Miss, do you live in Yangqing too? How come I've never seen you before?" Su Jinfeng asked as she found a cloth and wiped the stools and handed them to Zhang Yujie. Although Zhang Yujie felt that the countryside was a little dirty, she didn't nitpick at this time. She took the stools and sat down with a smile. "No, Auntie, I'm from Beijing." She carefully placed the long box in her hands on an empty stool. Yang Linjie held his grandfather's hand and curiously looked at the beautifully packaged long box. "Oh, how did you two meet?" Su Jinfeng couldn't be bothered to think about Duan Xueqing at this time. Seeing that the new girl had come, she couldn't help but ask. "I work at a publishing company." Poplar fruit flipped through a book and we met. Zhang Yujie smiled. We even went to America together a while ago. Poplar fruit, why didn't you tell us? Look, the girl is already here. Su Jinfeng turned her head and shouted at Poplar fruit. Poplar fruit finally managed to coax Kiki to stop crying. One of his hands was tightly hugged by Kiki's chest while the other hand was lovingly stroking Kiki's head to calm her down. Turning his head, Poplar fruit helplessly said, "Can the two of you stop for a while? Yujie, I'm sorry. Something like this happened, and I couldn't take care of you." Poplar fruit gently sighed. He didn't even want to talk right now. He only wanted to find a way to heal Kiki's swollen face. "I'll tell you guys later. If you have time, help me buy some medicine. Kiki's face is so swollen, I don't even know if it can go down," Poplar fruit said without raising his head as he held his daughter's face in his hands. Chapter 297. Feeling her father's gaze, Chi-Chi's crying finally stopped gradually. She pouted her small mouth in grievance, her delicate nose sniffling hard, and there were even tears the size of beans swirling in her eyes. She raised her little hand to wipe the tears on her face, but they were sticky and uncomfortable. Poplar fruit held his daughter's little hand and gently said, "You can't wipe it with your hands. If you wipe it again, you'll become a big dirty cat." Kiki had already cried until she looked like a big dirty cat. Not only were there tears on her face, but the mucus that flowed out from her nose was also a mess. "Use a wet tissue to wipe it." Zhang Yujie took out a wet tissue from her bag and helped Poplar fruit tear off the plastic packaging. "Okay, thank you." Poplar fruit took it and gently wiped Kiki's face. He accidentally touched the bruise. Kiki's little body suddenly trembled, her mouth twitched, and she was about to cry again. Poplar fruit quickly hugged Kiki in his arms, stood up, and coaxed, "Kiki, don't cry. Daddy won't touch there. Kiki, don't cry." Woof woof. Suddenly, 2 dog barks came from the door, and a small golden retriever ran in like an arrow from a bow. Gold followed Afu for a walk early in the morning. After returning to the village, it learned bad things from Afu. It often chased the old hen at home, causing dust to rise everywhere. Chickens flew and ducks jumped, and there was no peace for a moment. When it came back from its walk, it heard its little master crying from afar, so it anxiously ran in. Behind it was Afu, who had been running all the way. Gold circled around Poplar fruit's feet. It even raised its front leg to Poplar fruit's trousers. It stood up and barked twice, looking very anxious. Okay, you're also here to make trouble." Poplar fruit lightly kicked Gold's dirty paws and said, "This is Gold, right?" Zhang Yujie squatted down and stroked Gold's fur. Gold and Zhang Yujie met for the first time, so it didn't want to be touched by her. It jumped away and then continued to pester Poplar fruit. "Yes, it's Gold. I brought it back. It's not good to leave it alone in Yangcheng." Poplar fruit took the time to look at Zhang Yujie. He saw that Zhang Yujie's black boots were stained with mud, and the ends of her short hair were dyed red. Perhaps it was because of the strong wind in the countryside, but her hair was also a bit messy. A trace of guilt arose in Yangguo's heart. From the signs, Yangguo guessed that it was not easy for Zhang Yujie to come all the way to Yangguo's hometown and find such an unremarkable village in this small county. Yet, Yangguo didn't have the mood to pay attention to her. It was only because Zhang Yujie's heart was bigger that she didn't care about these details. If it was Duan Xueqing, she would probably be sad by the side. "You found your way here yourself?" Poplar fruit suddenly asked. "Why didn't you give me a call? I could have gone to pick you up. Look, your shoes are dirty." "It wasn't that hard." Zhang Yujie stood up and looked at Poplar fruit with a smile. "The taxi left me behind before I reached the village. It took me a long time to find someone to ask for directions. If I called you, the surprise would have been ruined." Poplar fruit looked at her for a long time, then said softly, "I'm sorry that something like this happened." "Hey, it's not a big deal." Zhang Yujie laughed. "I'm happy to see you. It doesn't matter if it's a surprise or not." Su Jinfeng listened to their conversation with wide eyes. She looked at Poplar fruit and Zhang Yujie from time to time. She muttered to herself, "This expression, something's wrong. But what about Xiaoqing? Did she split the fruit with Xiaoqing? I think Xiaoqing is pretty good. Of course, Yujie is also pretty good. It's just that she looks a little older. It's just I don't know how old she is. It's said that a woman who's 3 years older can hold a golden brick. It's good that she's a little older. She's sensible and considerate. Fruit is a little silly. She doesn't have a stable relationship. It's good that someone can take care of her. But that's not right. Yujie is from Beijing. They're so far apart. How can they get along? The distance is also a problem. Su Jinfeng started to think about her gains and losses. After a while, Yang Tai came back on his motorcycle. Before he stopped the motorcycle, he stretched out his hand and said, "The medicine is here." Zhang Yujie didn't understand his native language, but she still understood. She quickly took the small box of medicine from Yang Tai's hand and looked at it carefully. "That's not right," Zhang Yujie asked doubtfully. "This medicine is for adults. Can Kiki use it?" "Uncle, did you buy the wrong one?" Yang Tai didn't understand either. Su Jinfeng translated for Zhang Yujie. Of course, she also criticized him. "Why didn't you look at the medicine when you bought it? The older you get, the more muddle-headed you become." "Who said I didn't look at it?" Yang Tai was not convinced. He straightened his neck and said, "Laozui in the village only sells this medicine. What else can I be picky about? Can you just put up with it?" Poplar Fruit was worried about his daughter's swollen face. His brain wasn't very bright. He felt like he was trying to find a doctor in a desperate situation. He asked Zhang Yujie. "I don't think so." Zhang Yujie hesitated for a moment and said, "A child's skin isn't as rough as ours. I'm afraid there will be problems if you rub it. Why don't we go to the city and ask?" Poplar Fruit calmed down a little. He thought for a moment and said, "You really can't rub it. Then don't rush to buy medicine. I'll ask my brother-in-law later. I'll rub it for her when she goes to bed at night. Otherwise, I'll rub it all into her eyes. Dad, take this medicine first. It really can't be used on Kiki." Poplar Fruit handed the medicine back and said to Yang Tai in his native language, "Then I'll take it back and return it." Yang Tai took the medicine and got on the motorcycle again. "Why return it? You already bought it. How can Uncle Shui return it for you?" Poplar Fruit held his daughter and asked puzzledly. "Usually he won't. Your dad has a lot of face." Su Jinfeng laughed. "He goes there every day to drink tea and play cards. They have a good relationship. Hurry up and return it. Anyway, we haven't opened it. It's only a few dozen yuan." "A few dozen what?" Yang Tai said indifferently. "Shui didn't even take my money." Poplar Fruit didn't care about that small amount of money. However, he was too lazy to persuade the older generation who were used to dealing with every cent clearly. Since they could solve it, then there was no need to say anything. Yang Tai's motorcycle hadn't started yet when there was a loud noise coming from the courtyard entrance. "What do you think you're going after hitting someone?" Yang Hairong's muffled voice appeared at the entrance of the courtyard. 2 of his teeth were knocked out by Yang Guo's slap, so he spoke with a lisp. Poplar Fruit's face suddenly darkened. He turned his head and saw a group of people standing at the courtyard entrance. There were both men and women. They were all Yang Hairong's family members. "Everyone, use your votes to support the poor. Greater than over equal to." Chapter 298. Poplar Fruit's courtyard was surrounded by a large group of people. Most of them were from Yang Hairong's Yang family, and there were also some people who wanted to watch the show. Yang Hairong was holding a hoe with his head held high. Although his mouth was bleeding, he still had a proud look on his face as he stood in front of the crowd. 2 of his cousins who were close to Yang Hairong stood on either side of him. The one on the left was called Yang Xinfu, and he was holding a stool leg in his hand. The one on the right was called Yang Dongshan. He probably couldn't find anything useful, so he directly carried the big broom from home. Only these 2 young men in vests were holding the weapon with Yang Hairong. The others were standing behind with their hands on their chests. This wasn't a fight between villages in the last century, so they didn't take it seriously. Kiki was shocked by Yang Hairong's sudden appearance. In her heart, this person was like a big demon, very scary. She didn't see how Poplar Fruit beat up this big demon, so her heart was still full of fear. She was like a little ostrich, tightly burying her head in her father's arms. "I told you to be arrogant, arrogant." Yang Hairong's hand that wasn't holding a hoe was holding a lit cigarette. He pointed at Poplar Fruit and said proudly, "You can look down on us villagers just because you have money. You think you're so great because you have money?" Zhang Yu didn't understand what they were talking about, so she whispered to Poplar Fruit, "Should we call the police?" Calling the police is useless. Poplar Fruit turned around and put Kiki in Zhang Yujia's arms. Indeed, in the village, as long as no one died, it was always settled by themselves. Even if the police came, it would be useless. The villagers wouldn't talk reason with you. It seemed that today was not going to be peaceful. Poplar Fruit felt that he had to go up and talk with them. However, Kiki grabbed Poplar Fruit's collar tightly and refused to let go. Poplar Fruit gently stroked her head and said, "Good girl, don't be afraid. Let Daddy vent for you. Step back or go into the house," Poplar Fruit said to Zhang Yujia and Su Jinfeng. "Don't fight." Su Jinfeng could no longer stay calm. After all, the three of them were holding weapons, and Yang Hairong had a rusty hoe in his hand. Trembling, she pulled Poplar Fruit and said, "Why don't we give in?" "Don't worry." Poplar Fruit smiled, patted his mother's hand, and comforted her. "They can't touch me." With that, Poplar Fruit turned around and walked towards Yang Hairong with a faint smile on his face. "Poplar Fruit, it's not that I want to criticize you." Yang Hairong's father stood behind Yang Hairong and pretended to be serious as he said, "You can't forget your roots, right? You've made a lot of money, so why can't you take these brothers who grew up with you? Even if you've grown up and looked down on us, and Hairong begs you to give him a job, you can't beat him up, right? This is clearly bullying, isn't it?" Yang Hairong's mother was like a village shrew. She cried, stomped her feet, and yelled, "My poor son, he quit a job that cost him thousands of yuan to come back from afar, just to help you, you damn rich man, who knew that his good intentions would not be rewarded, and 2 of his teeth would be knocked out. As a mother, how can I not feel sorry for him? Your whole family will die a horrible death." Everyone in Yang Hairong's family was a master of twisting the truth. At this moment, they were all scolding Poplar Fruit at the same time, trying to gain the upper hand by a show of strength so that they would be in the right position. Poplar Fruit was silent. He stood in front of Yang Hairong and did not refute a word. It was not that he was not angry. Poplar Fruit's chest was already filled with raging anger. It was just that he did not want to refute, because at this time, one person could not win against a group of people. "What do you want?" Poplar Fruit asked coldly. His hands were naturally hanging down, but if people paid attention, they would see that the veins on Poplar Fruit's hands were squirming. It was a sign that he was burning with anger and was slowly accumulating strength. Yang Hairong did not expect Poplar Fruit to respond so calmly. He was suddenly at a loss for words. Before he came, he thought that Poplar Fruit would argue with him or fight to the death with him. He also thought that Poplar Fruit would soften and beg for mercy when he saw the group of people, but he did not expect Poplar Fruit's attitude to be so carefree. "Do you still think that you haven't been beaten enough?" Poplar Fruit suddenly laughed softly. That laughter was a little cold, like a strange melody floating through the crowd. Yang Hairong was stunned, and his eyes suddenly widened. He did not expect Poplar Fruit to suddenly say such mocking words. He roared angrily, "Do you want to die? Can't you see that there are so many of us? Can't you see my hoe or what?" Before he finished speaking, he swung the hoe up and made a posture that looked like he was going to smash Poplar Fruit's head. Zhang Yujia screamed. She really thought that the hoe was going to hit him. Poplar Fruit was indeed very calm. He could see that Yang Hairong's action was more of a threat than a hit. "You still think that you're right, right?" Poplar Fruit said with a smile. In contrast to the long-winded scolding of the other side, Poplar Fruit did not say much, but every word made people feel very uncomfortable. It was as if a fly had suddenly flown into their mouths while they were talking, and they felt disgusted as if they had eaten it. "Fuck, you hit Brother Rong, and you're still so stubborn." Yang Xinfu, who was next to them, could not hold back anymore. He shouted and rushed up with the stool leg. The stool leg was as thick as a person's forearm. Although it was aimed at the arm, if it was smashed down with force, it would almost break the arm. These 3 people, including Yang Hairong, were all hotheads. They did not care about the consequences of fighting. So when Yang Xinfu smashed the stool leg, he had no intention of reducing the force. Poplar Fruit's reaction was very fast. He just took a step back and avoided Yang Xinfu's attack. Yang Xinfu used all his strength to swing the stool leg. After he missed, his whole body was affected by inertia and fell forward. Poplar Fruit took advantage of the opportunity to press down on his arm. He stepped forward with his left leg and raised his right leg, ready to knee him in the chest. If the impact was solid, with Poplar Fruit's strength, Yang Xinfu would definitely have a few broken ribs. However, Poplar Fruit withdrew his leg in the end. He did not hit Yang Xinfu. Instead, he pressed down on Yang Xinfu's head with his left hand and pushed him hard to the ground. Yang Xinfu awkwardly rolled on the ground twice before stopping. It was exactly the same as when Yang Hairong was kicked to the ground by Poplar Fruit. This made Yang Hairong's eyes turn red. He remembered the humiliation that Poplar Fruit gave him not long ago. The blood in his mouth and the smell of mud on his body had not dissipated, and his mind was filled with hatred. Everyone, use your votes to support the poor. Greater than over equal. Chapter 299. Fuck you. Yang Hairong roared. The humiliation of being kicked to the ground by Poplar Fruit surged into his heart. Filled with anger, he didn't care about the consequences and swung the hoe down. The rusty and muddy hoe was heading straight for Poplar Fruit's head. Because of the angle, the hoe couldn't be controlled by inertia. It was impossible to stop and change direction. Yang Hairong didn't want to stop at all. This was just like when he was 15 years old and chased people on the streets. He didn't care about anything and just wanted to kill them. Ah, everyone exclaimed, including the clansmen behind Yang Hairong. They were all scared out of their wits. It was one thing to scare people and teach them a lesson, but it was another thing to kill them. If Yang Hairong killed Poplar Fruit here, Yang Hairong wouldn't be able to escape. They would also have a blood feud with the Yang family behind Poplar Fruit. Looking at the incoming hoe, Poplar Fruit's face flashed a cold light. He didn't expect Yang Hairong to be so daring. He had the ability to dodge it, but he didn't. Poplar Fruit directly faced it head-on. His eyes were sharp and his hands were fast. His right hand directly grabbed the handle of the hoe and used all his strength to block the falling hoe. Only he was strong. Normal people wouldn't be able to block it. Yang Hairong hadn't recovered from the shock of Poplar Fruit catching his hoe when Poplar Fruit's left hand appeared in front of his face. Half-step collapsing fist. Poplar Fruit's left hand calmly held back most of its strength. Yang Hairong was reckless. He couldn't be impulsive. If his fist exploded Yang Hairong's head, there would be no end to it. Moreover, he was in a difficult situation where he was being watched closely. He couldn't leave a weakness for others to exploit. Although he had held back his strength, Poplar Fruit's punch was still quite heavy, and it landed right on Yang Hairong's nose. In the military's fighting techniques, one of the key points was to hit the nose of the enemy. This was the best way to make the enemy lose their ability to fight for a short period of time. Boom! In Yang Hairong's consciousness, there was a soft sound that was almost unreachable. It was like a loud clang, as if someone had hit his head heavily. Seeing stars, it was as if a dying workshop had opened in front of his eyes. Red, blue, purple, green, all of them were blooming. After swaying for a moment, Yang Hairong lost his grip on the hoe. He took 2 steps back and fell to the ground. Although his nose was not broken, blood flowed from his nose into his wide, open mouth. With such a dramatic change in the situation, everyone present was stunned. They stared blankly at Yang Hairong, who had fallen to the ground. Yang Xinfu hadn't gotten up from the ground just a moment ago, and now another one had been taken down. Moreover, everyone thought that Poplar Fruit was dead for sure. In the end, the Poplar Fruit was still standing there, and the fierce Yang Hairong was taken care of. Poplar Fruit smiled and put down the hoe in his hand. If he was still holding on, then he would be the one to blow up the bunker. He turned his head to look at Yang Dongshan, who was standing there in a daze with both hands holding the broom. He then looked at the crowd surrounding the door and said softly, "Still want to fight? Still want to fight?" The second voice was a roar. Poplar Fruit had just finished speaking when his left hand slammed the hoe he had seized on the ground. His body twisted sideways, and his right fist punched the hoe that was as thick as a baby's arm into two. Bang! Kacha! The sound fell into everyone's heart, and the two brand-new pieces of the hoe that fell to the ground told everyone that this was not an act. Poplar Fruit really broke the hoe with his bare hands. "Come on," Poplar Fruit shouted at them. "You want to fight? Come on, I'll take on as many as you want." "So manly," Zheng Yujie, who was behind him with Kiki in her arms, exclaimed softly with sparkling eyes. Back in Yangcheng, Zheng Yujie had seen Poplar Fruit's strong body at Poplar Fruit's house. She didn't expect that Poplar Fruit would be so hard to beat. Zheng Yujie, who admired violence, felt that she could not suppress it anymore. "Papa!" When Kiki saw that her father beat the big demon down, the fear in her heart immediately disappeared. She happily clapped her small hands. "You came to bully Poplar Fruit. Do you think there's no one in our Guliang family?" A vigorous and powerful shout suddenly came from behind the crowd at the courtyard entrance. The people surrounding the courtyard entrance looked back and found that there was another group of people behind them. Half of them were old people, and the other half were young and strong, but they were all holding kitchen knives, shoulder poles, and other weapons in their hands. Here, the difference between the Guliang family and the Chu Song Yang family. The Tu Yang family were actually not the native of Guangdong province. They migrated from the north 200 years ago and gradually grew stronger. Although the two Yang clans were both surnamed Yang, their origins were actually from different ancestors. The Guliang family migrated from a small village called Guli in Hulua province, while the Chu Song Yang family came from a small village called Chu Song in the Huai River area. Because they were both from the same village, in order to distinguish them, the two families added the name of the place where their ancestors lived in front of the Yang family. The one who shouted was the current head of the Guliang family, Poplar Fruit's third granduncle. In fact, the concept of clans was very weak now. Third granduncle, as the head of the clan, existed in name only. His biggest role was to record the clan and gather the elders of each branch to discuss things. However, third granduncle was fair and courageous, so everyone respected him. When he called for people, 20 to 30 people came to support Poplar Fruit. If they really wanted to fight, the Chu Song Yang family was not very afraid. It was just that most of the people who came were women and children, and their hands were empty. Unlike the Guliang family, who were fully armed, they immediately panicked. "Wait a minute. Don't fight." An older elder of the Chu Song Yang family came out of the crowd and waved his hand. "Yang Hongjun, do you have anything to say?" Third granduncle stood in front of the crowd and asked, "Guli family, what you're doing is not kind. Our Chu Song family came today to seek justice. Why are you taking out knives and guns? Do you want to fight with our Chu Song family?" Yang Hongjun said in a neither servile nor overbearing manner. Poplar Fruit was behind them. He coldly laughed and loudly said, "Seeking justice? What a joke. Is there anyone like you who uses a hoe to seek justice?" It was inconvenient to talk with one in front and one behind, so the Chu Song Yang family moved to the side and faced off with the Guli Yang family in front of Poplar Fruit's courtyard. "Poplar Fruit, are you okay?" Third granduncle walked over and stood beside Poplar Fruit and asked, "Are you hurt anywhere?" Actually, this question was obvious. Poplar Fruit still had two people crying out in pain at his feet. How could he be hurt? Chapter 300. "Thank you, third great uncle," Poplar Fruit said with a smile. "I don't care about these people." Yanggua's tone was full of confidence, which made third great uncle look at Yanggua in a new light. Poplar Fruit was naughty when he was young. After junior high school, he became interested in learning. Later on, he became more and more like a scholar. Who would have thought that he had such courage? In the countryside, scholars were admired, but the ones that people really respected were the tough guys who fought for the country with their fists and kicks. Poplar Fruit, don't go too far. I know you can fight, but you can't bully people," Yang Hongjun said angrily. "You guys surrounded my house. Tell me, who bullied who?" Poplar Fruit chuckled and responded indifferently. If you didn't beat Hai Rong until he vomited blood, would we have surrounded your house? Yang Hongjun said loudly, as if he wasn't afraid of others knowing their grievances. Then ask him why I beat him. Poplar Fruit still responded indifferently. Third great uncle stood beside Poplar Fruit. Because of his age, his body was a little bent, but at this moment he was like a pillar standing firmly behind Poplar Fruit to support him. Third great uncle never doubted Poplar Fruit's character. Including Poplar Fruit, Yang Tai's family were all very honest people, although sometimes Su Jinfeng's big mouth could easily offend people. Take Yang Ping as an example. She opened a factory in the village and immediately recruited many young and strong men to work there. They only worked 5 days a week and could get a salary of more than 2,000 yuan a month. Many people were jealous of her. Third great uncle's youngest son was a little honest and not very promising. In the end, he was hired by Yang Ping to be a supervisor in the factory. He earned 3,500 yuan a month. Now, there were so many people who came to ask for his hand in marriage. Third great uncle would support Poplar Fruit's family, whether it was for public or private reasons. It's all because of you. Yang Hairong's mother rushed out and pointed at Poplar Fruit. She scolded. Now that your family is rich, you look down on others. My Hairong brought some fruit to ask for a job. Not only did you not give it to him, you even hit him. Huh. Poplar Fruit looked up to the sky and laughed. Just now, they had the advantage in numbers and couldn't be bothered to argue with them. They really thought that they were in the right. What are you laughing at? Yang Hairong's mother was confused and asked with a frown. Poplar Fruit stopped laughing and pointed at Yang Hairong, who was pretending to be dead on the ground. Me not giving him a job is two different things. Now that Poplar Fruit was in control of the situation, Poplar Fruit didn't mind reasoning with them. Why didn't I give him a job? Poplar Fruit sneered and said, Don't talk nonsense with your eyes wide open. You all know what kind of rotten person Yang Hairong is. He has always been lazy. If I recruit him to work in the factory, I'll be raising an idle person for nothing. I'll also lead other people astray. A prodigal son can turn back. Yang Hongjun interjected and said, Why do you say that Hairong can't become better? He went to work in Guan City for a few months. Work, that's also a joke. Poplar Fruit said, When he came to my house, he complained to me about this and that. Isn't the salary in Guan City higher than ours? But where did the money he earned go? Did he send any money back for you to spend? I'm telling you, he spent it all on the bar and women. He resigned and came back to ask me for a job. Poplar Fruit paused and said with a smile, I guess that's not the case, right? With Yang Hairong's personality, could it be that he did something bad or was caught slacking, and then he was fired and had no choice but to come back? You're talking nonsense. Yang Hairong's mother's eyes flashed with panic, and she said, You hit people, and you still have a reason? My poor son, you hit him until his teeth fell out. How is he going to face people in the future? As she said that, she sat on the ground, slapped her thigh, and cried. Poplar Fruit shook his head and said, Keep pretending, keep pretending. He saw that his guess was right, but he was too lazy to continue to poke at their scars. Looking at Chu Song and the Yang family, who knew that Yang Hairong's family had gradually quietened down, Yang was smiled and said, Master Hongjun, I know you're a reasonable person. Today, I want you to be the judge. Do you know why I hit him and knocked out his teeth? Poplar Fruit asked softly. Why? Yang Hongjun frowned and asked. Poplar Fruit didn't answer directly, but turned around and came to Zheng Yujia's side. What are you talking about? Zheng Yujia asked in a low voice. She didn't understand a word just now. Poplar Fruit's hometown dialect was different from Cantonese. Zheng Yujia didn't even understand Cantonese, let alone Poplar Fruit's hometown dialect. We'll talk later. Poplar Fruit whispered. He took Kiki from Zheng Yujia's hands. Kiki was no longer afraid. She hugged her father's neck and patted her father's chest excitedly. Kiki had vented her anger when her father hit that demon. Poplar Fruit lovingly brushed his daughter's hair away, then walked in front of Yang Hongjun and said, Master Hongjun, take a look at my daughter's face. Yang Hongjun tilted his head and looked carefully. Third great uncle also walked over and frowned. Poplar Fruit continued, The scar on my daughter's face was pinched by Yang Herong out of hatred. If he didn't touch my daughter, why did I hit him so hard? Poplar Fruit's words caused an uproar. Yang Hongjun also widened his eyes in surprise. He could clearly see the two swollen bruises on Kiki's face. It was human nature to be compassionate, and Yang Hongjun himself treated his own child as his own flesh and blood. Chi-Chi's injuries were so severe that even Yang Hongjun himself felt terrible when he put himself in her shoes. How dare he lay his hands on an innocent child? Yang Hongjun turned his head angrily and looked at Yang Herong, who was lying on the ground pretending to be dead. He kicked him and asked, "Herong, is it the same as what Poplar Fruit said?" After Yang Hongjun stepped aside, Chu Song and the rest of the Yang family were able to clearly see the scars on Chi-Chi's face. They all fell silent at the same time, and their gazes towards Yang Herong were filled with disbelief, anger, and dissatisfaction. Yang Herong had sinned, but he had put the entire Chu Song Yang family in an unjust position. The Chu Song Yang family also saw it clearly. Everyone, including third great-uncle, was glaring angrily at Yang Herong. They also looked at the Chu Song Yang family with disdain. The Chu Song Yang family knew that they were in the wrong. An adult hitting a child, no matter what excuse they had, was a heinous crime, and they had just become Yang Herong's accomplices. They were actually tricked into coming here to ask for an explanation. Just thinking about it made them feel so ashamed that they wanted to die. Everyone, use your votes to smash the poor. Greater than over equal to. Chapter 301. Get up. Yang Hongjun's face was taut as he kicked Yang Herong again. He lowered his voice and shouted, "Give me an explanation." Yang Herong was kicked so hard that he curled up on the ground and sat up. He lowered his head and remained silent. He couldn't beat Yang Hongjun, and now even his own grandpa was questioning him. He didn't know how to defend himself. His nosebleed had stopped long ago. His red lips that were stained with dirt moved, but no sound came out. Seeing such a reaction, how could the people from the Chu Songyang clan not confirm that they had been tricked by Yang Herong? Standing on the periphery, a few people from the Chu Songyang clan shook their heads and quietly withdrew from the crowd and slipped away. "Stop kicking him! Stop kicking him!" Yang Herong's mother, who was making a scene at the side, rolled and crawled over. She hugged her son and cried, "Grandpa Hongjun, stop hitting him. He knows he's wrong. He knows he's wrong." Yang Hongjun looked up to the sky and sighed. He also felt that he had no face to face Poplar Fruit and the Guliang family. He thought sullenly in his heart, "If I had known, I wouldn't have stepped into this muddy water." However, he was now the person in charge of the Chu Songyang family. He had to give Poplar Fruit and the others an explanation. "Guli's third grandpa, how do you think this matter should be resolved?" Yang Hongjun hesitated and asked. Third grandpa's eyes flashed with anger. He said, "This Yang Herong of yours is too much. How can he hit a girl? In our clan, if he fell in my hands, I would definitely cut off his arm." Yang Hongjun was very embarrassed. He didn't know how to respond to third grandpa's words. Nowadays, the concept of clans was weak, especially the Chu Songyang family. Although they came from the same clan, they didn't have a united force. Each family had to sweep the snow in front of their door, not to mention cutting off someone's arm. Even if they whipped him a few times, they had to consider whether or not he would sue them for private torture. Third grandpa was actually angry. He paused and turned to Poplar Fruit and asked, "Xiaogua, how do you think this matter should be handled? Don't be afraid. We have so many people behind you." What he meant was that the Poplar Fruit could be dealt with however he wanted. There were 20 to 30 of them standing there with knives in their hands, and they had no choice but to obey. "Big Baddie." Kiki hugged Poplar Fruit's neck and pointed at Yang Herong. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, "Third granduncle, I've already hit him. He has also learned his lesson. Let's just forget about this matter. Master Hongjun, this has nothing to do with you. I know you were fooled by Hyrong, but since you're here, do me a favor and take him back. I don't want to see him again." Poplar Fruit picked it up heavily and put it down gently. That was the attitude Poplar Fruit displayed. To be honest, Poplar Fruit didn't go easy on Yang Hairong. Yang Hairong's teeth were knocked out and he was bleeding. No matter how much punishment he gave, it would just leave an image of an unforgiving person. He might as well give Yang Hongjun some face and leave it to his family to deal with. He believed that after such a thing happened, Yang Hairong and his family wouldn't be able to raise their heads in the village anymore. Yang Hongjun was stunned by Poplar Fruit's words. He didn't expect that Poplar Fruit, who should be the most angry and unforgiving person, would say such words. Was this the end of the matter? Yang Hongjun looked deeply at Poplar Fruit and said seriously, "Okay, Poplar Fruit, Grandpa Hongjun will accept your kindness. Don't worry, Grandpa Hongjun will promise you that Yang Hairong will take a detour when he sees you. If he comes to trouble you again, you can come to me at any time. I, Yang Hongjun, will put my face there for you to slap." After saying that, he waved his hand toward the crowd and shouted, "Ertzi, little seven, come over and carry them back. Don't stay here and embarrass yourself." The people from Chu Song's Yang family came quickly and ran even faster. 3 to 5 young men came up and lowered their heads. They dragged and pushed Yang Hairong, Yang Xinfu, and the others away. Yang Hongjun didn't have the face to stay there any longer. He lowered his head and left with the crowd. Seeing them leave with their tails between their legs, Third Grandpa stood beside Poplar Fruit and suddenly asked, "Are we letting them go just like that? What else?" Poplar Fruit and Third Grandpa looked at each other. The two of them smiled knowingly. He got Dad to take out 2 packs of Chunghwa cigarettes from the house and gave out a few to the clan relatives who came to support them. After thanking them, the Yang family went back with satisfaction. Poplar Fruit talked to Third Grandpa and said, "Third Grandpa, why don't you stay for dinner tonight? Call Uncle Jianpeng back." Yang Jianpeng was Third Grandpa's youngest son. He was only 8 years older than Poplar Fruit, but his seniority was 1 generation higher. "There's no need," Third Grandpa said with a chuckle. "Your family has guests, so I won't disturb you. I have something to do on my side." Poplar Fruit took out a bag of chocolates and stuffed it into Third Grandpa's hands. He said with a smile, "Then I won't keep you. This chocolate was brought back from America. Take it back and let your grandchildren try it." Third Grandpa didn't refuse and took the chocolate. He chuckled with his hands behind his back and slowly walked back. "What did you say? Is the matter settled?" After everyone left, Zheng Yujie came over and whispered to Poplar Fruit, "It's nothing." Poplar Fruit looked at her with a smile and said, "I reasoned with them, and they apologized and left. Go ahead and fight with me." Zheng Yujie smiled and rolled her eyes at him. "You reason with them? You're obviously a violent maniac." "Haha," Poplar Fruit said with a smile. "I did reason with them. Whoever has the bigger fist is the one who is right." Kiki, whose face didn't hurt so much, began to struggle in Poplar Fruit's arms. She wanted to go down and find Goldie to play with. Goldie was also doing well. At the beginning, it kept barking at Yang Hairong. If it wasn't for Zheng Yujie holding it down, it would probably have rushed up with Poplar Fruit. Seeing that his daughter had regained her vitality and spirit, Poplar Fruit breathed a sigh of relief. He pulled the baby walker over and carefully carried Kiki in to let her play. He was worried that the incident just now would leave a psychological shadow on Kiki. In fact, the incident just now hurt Kiki quite a lot. If it wasn't for Poplar Fruit, who defeated the great demon like an indomitable hero, Kiki would probably have a psychological shadow. Now, her heart was filled with the tall figure of her father. The dark clouds were driven away by the golden sunshine, and Kiki was happy again. "Come, I'll take you to your room." Poplar Fruit asked his mother to help take care of Kiki. He lifted Zheng Yujie's small suitcase and said to Zheng Yujie with a smile, "Okay, where is it?" Zheng Yujie ran over and picked up the long box and said, "This is my gift for Kiki." "Haha, then we'll open it together tomorrow." Poplar Fruit said with a smile, "Your room is next to mine." That was the empty guest room, and no one had stayed there yet. When they arrived at Zheng Yujie's room, before they put down the things, Poplar Fruit's cell phone suddenly rang. Begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Please use your votes to support the poor. Greater than over equal to Chapter 302. Yang Ping's phone suddenly rang like an alarm bell, giving Poplar Fruit an ominous premonition. What happened at home shouldn't have reached her ears. Why would Yang Ping call in the middle of the day? Frowning, Poplar Fruit picked up the phone and tapped on the screen. Zheng Yujie saw that Poplar Fruit began to speak in a dialect that she didn't understand. She felt a little bored, so she took the suitcase from Poplar Fruit and started to pack her things. The room was very clean. Su Jinfeng cleaned it whenever she was free. There was no dust on the tiles. Even if there was, it was brought in by them. Poplar Fruit listened to the phone. His frown deepened, and his tone became very urgent. Suddenly, Poplar Fruit shouted twice into the phone. Zheng Yujie was shocked and looked at Poplar Fruit. She didn't bother to pack her things. She stood up and walked to Poplar Fruit's side, looking at Poplar Fruit with concern. Poplar Fruit's voice was much softer, but there was no sign of his frown relaxing. This made Zheng Yujie very worried. Did something happen? As soon as Poplar Fruit put down the phone, Zheng Yujie asked with concern. Yes. Poplar Fruit nodded, sighed, and said, My brother-in-law was arrested by the city's inspection team and sent to the Public Security Bureau. Wait a minute. Poplar Fruit picked up the phone again and called Chen Longjiang. Although Chen Longjiang was the secretary of the county committee in Poplar Fruit's hometown, he wasn't a local. So when Poplar Fruit spoke to him, he used Mandarin. This time, Zheng Yujie was finally not so depressed. She could understand. It turned out that the inspection team from the city had suddenly appeared in Yang Ping's shop at around 10 o'clock in the morning. Without saying a word, they began to close the door and arrest people. The shop was turned upside down, and Yang Ping was still crying over the phone, complaining that they were more bandits than bandits. Because Yang Chengwan was the legal representative during the registration, the inspection team directly arrested Yang Chengwan, who was arranging work in the store at that time, and detained him in the county's Public Security Bureau. Without any excuse, the store was directly sealed with a strip of tape. This made Poplar Fruit very angry. This group of people did not pay attention to the legal process. It was obvious that they wanted to convict him first and then investigate the evidence. What made Poplar Fruit and Yang Ping even more uneasy was that Yang Chengwan had been arrested. It wasn't a big deal that the store was closed, but they couldn't let anything happen to him. Once he was in the Public Security Bureau, who knew if they would do something evil? If they beat up brother-in-law Yang Chengwan, something bad would happen to him. Poplar Fruit would really regret it. When he received the news, Poplar Fruit was also stunned. However, at this time, as a man, he couldn't panic. He comforted his sister, who was so flustered that her voice was trembling, and then called Chen Longjiang to see if there was any way to save Yang Chengwan. When Chen Longjiang received Poplar Fruit's call, he didn't know that something had happened. Yesterday, he had just told Poplar Fruit about this matter. As a result, the city was so impatient that they directly arrested people. Chen Longjiang answered the phone, and his chest was burning with anger. Do you think that I, Chen Longjiang, don't have people? Poplar Fruit, don't worry. I'll call them now. Chen Longjiang said calmly, The director of the Public Security Bureau is one of my people. With him, the other side definitely can't hurt Chengwan. Let's delay it. Come to the county when you have time. After hanging up the phone, Poplar Fruit looked at Zheng Yujie and reluctantly squeezed out a smile. He said, It's okay. You rest first. I'm going to the city. I'll come back in the evening. Whether Chen Longjiang said it or not, Poplar Fruit was definitely going to the county. After all, this matter was caused by him. He had to go to the county to visit his brother-in-law and comfort his sister. Zheng Yujie pulled Poplar Fruit and said with her eyes wide open, You still say that nothing happened? I heard everything on the phone. I'll go with you. The two of us can take care of each other. Maybe I can even help. Poplar Fruit hesitated and said, You'd better stay at home. You ran so far without rest. Besides, you're not familiar with this place. What can you help me with? I'm not tired. Anyway, I have to go with you. Zheng Yujie said firmly. Alas, Poplar Fruit sighed and said, Then you can come with me. Hearing that Poplar Fruit agreed, Zheng Yujie happily ran back to get her bag. She didn't even change her clothes and directly ran back to Poplar Fruit. Hello, Brother Han. I'll borrow your car. And it's urgent. I have to go to the county. No, You don't have to follow me. I'll drive myself. Okay. Thank you. Poplar Fruit put down the phone and said to Zheng Yujie, let's go. I've borrowed the car. Where's your Land Rover? Didn't you drive it back? Zheng Yujie asked doubtfully. I gave it to my sister this morning. Poplar Fruit hurriedly went downstairs and said without looking back. Zheng Yujie quickly carried her bag and followed Poplar Fruit down the stairs. Mom, I'm going out for a while. I'll come back in the evening. Poplar Fruit took Kiki out and said to Su Jinfeng. He told his sister not to tell the two elders at home. After all, they were old. They could only be anxious and couldn't do anything about it. As soon as they walked out of the courtyard, Brother Han, who Poplar Fruit had just called, drove the car over. Brother Han's name was Zhang Yonghan. He was also a villager. Poplar Fruit was a few years older than him. He had a good relationship with Poplar Fruit. His car was a Mazda from Nihon country, which cost tens of thousands of yuan. Of course, it couldn't be compared with Poplar Fruit's Land Rover, but Poplar Fruit wasn't picky. Thank you, Brother Han. Poplar Fruit took the key and said. Zhang Yonghan smiled and nodded. He looked at the fashionable girl behind Poplar Fruit and said, no wonder you didn't let me go. Fruit, you're awesome. Poplar Fruit smiled at him and didn't explain. Zheng Yujie sat in the passenger seat with Kiki in her arms. Poplar Fruit drove. Zheng Yujie knew that she wasn't familiar with the road, so she didn't fight with Poplar Fruit. The car slowly drove out of the village and ran on the county road. Poplar Fruit began to speed up. Because his daughter was beside him, even if he was anxious, Poplar Fruit didn't dare to drive too fast. He kept it at about 50 kilometers per hour. Why are you in such a hurry? Zheng Yujie still didn't understand this matter. She turned her head and asked Poplar Fruit. They were arrested. Your secretary friend should be able to help solve the problem. He can't solve it, Poplar Fruit said in a low voice. Can't solve it? Zheng Yujie doubtfully asked. What kind of secretary is he? Town secretary or village secretary? County party secretary. Poplar Fruit briefly replied. He can't do anything? Zheng Yujie was somewhat speechless and said, then what did your brother-in-law do? Even the county party secretary can't protect him? My brother-in-law didn't do anything. Poplar Fruit punched the steering wheel. His heart was very sullen and depressed. He clenched his teeth and said, it's all because of me. I implicated him. Chapter 303. It's all because of me. As soon as Poplar Fruit said this, Zheng Yujie was shocked. What are you talking about? Zheng Yujie asked in confusion. It's a business problem. How could it be your fault? She had a lot of contact with Poplar Fruit. As far as she knew, Poplar Fruit had no interest in doing business at all. Sometimes, when she talked to Poplar Fruit about the operation of Dongxin Publishing, Poplar Fruit was not interested at all. No, it's not a business problem. Poplar Fruit told Zheng Yujie about the cause and effect of the incident while driving. So you mean, you don't even know who wants to do this to you? Zheng Yujie asked in confusion. How is that possible? Have you offended anyone recently? Poplar Fruit shook his head and said, no, I don't have any impression of it at all. Well, this is indeed a very strange thing. Could you have made a mistake? Or maybe the secretary made a mistake, and the target might actually be your store? Zheng Yujie asked. It's normal to have competitors in business. It definitely has nothing to do with business. Poplar Fruit said with certainty. This is not a coincidence. There's another incident that is exactly the same as this one. It's a mysterious person who suddenly made a move on my business. Poplar Fruit continued to talk to Zheng Yujie about how he had asked Song Jiwen to deal with Liang Zhenglin, but it had failed. Poplar Fruit finally concluded, the mastermind behind these two incidents should be the same person. It's impossible for it to fall on me by chance. Well, it seems that they are indeed targeting you. Zheng Yujie frowned and said, what's the matter with Liang Zhenglin? Could it be him? It shouldn't be. Yang shook her head slightly and said, if he's so capable, why would he use such a small trick like taking secret photos? Candid photos? Zheng Yujie stared at him and asked, what candid photos? He was the one who got someone to secretly take photos of me and a friend. Poplar Fruit said, you know Xueqing, right? You mean Duan Xueqing? A photo of you and Duan Xueqing? Zheng Yujie took a deep breath and asked, no, Liang Zhenglin is her admirer. He got someone to take photos of me and my friend to provoke her, causing Xueqing to not talk to me anymore. Poplar Fruit said. Originally, he didn't want to mention this matter that made him very depressed, but since he mentioned it, he had to say it. Zheng Yujie hesitated for a moment. She hugged Kiki with one hand and turned around to take the bag from the back seat with the other hand. She rummaged in the bag for a while and took out 2 photos from a hidden compartment. Then she asked, "You mean these photos?" Poplar Fruit drove seriously and took the time to glance at them from the corner of his eye. It would have been better if he didn't look. Once he saw them, Poplar Fruit's eyes widened. He stopped the car by the roadside and pulled the handbrake. Then he grabbed the photos and flipped through them. Then he stared at Zheng Yujie and asked, "How did you get these photos?" 2 photos. One was exactly the same as the photos he took from Duan Xueqing, and the other was a photo of him and Duan Xueqing walking downstairs with smiles on their faces. Could it be that the person who ordered Qianjuan wasn't Liang Zhenglin? Could it be that Qianjuan also lied to him? Are you suspecting me? Zheng Yujie tilted her head and asked Poplar Fruit. Poplar Fruit hesitated for a moment and shook his head. No, it can't be you. He believed in Zheng Yujie. With Zheng Yujie's carefree and very heroic character, it was absolutely impossible for her to do such a thing. Zheng Yujie blinked her beautiful red phoenix eyes and looked at Poplar Fruit for a long time. Finally, she softened and softened. In fact, when she received the photos, she was no better than Duan Xueqing. She was very sad in her heart. But on second thought, if this was really the case, wouldn't she have fallen into someone else's trap? Compared to most people, Zheng Yujie had seen a lot more ups and downs. She was more mature than Duan Xueqing. In Zheng Yujie's view, this matter couldn't be solved by jealousy and throwing a tantrum, especially for a muddle-headed person like Poplar Fruit. If she threw a tantrum, it would only make him feel annoyed and give others the opportunity to take advantage of it. Love could only be won through competition. Holding the photos, Zheng Yujie, who was preparing to fly to Poplar Fruit's hometown in Beijing, was more determined to go on this trip. She also decided to ignore these suffocating photos. She didn't care about the past. What she wanted was a future. Your friend is called Fong Beibei, right? Zheng Yujie couldn't help but ask this question. Poplar Fruit scratched his head and was about to answer, but Zheng Yujie continued without waiting for him to answer. Now that you've mentioned the photos, I know who's targeting you. Zheng Yujie sighed and said, "You're wrong. It wasn't you who got your cousin into trouble. It was me who got you into trouble." Poplar Fruit was stunned. He turned his head and immediately realized. You mean the mastermind behind these 2 things is the person who gave you the photos? Yes, you've seen him too. Zheng Yujie nodded and said, "Li Zichao." Poplar Fruit immediately remembered the feminine man standing behind Zheng Taiming at the airport. Zheng Yujie should have a lot of pursuers, but the only one Poplar Fruit had seen before was Li Zichao. Yes. Zheng Yujie nodded and sighed. I'm sorry. He must be the one who took his anger out on you. Even Liang Zhenglin was protected by him. I'm guessing that the exchange was for these photos. At this time, Poplar Fruit suddenly smiled and said, "You don't have to say sorry, because it's not your fault." The sullen feeling of the past few days finally disappeared. Poplar Fruit rarely smiled. He was not ridiculing, but his heart was really happy. He didn't know who was the one who was the most upset when things happened. Now that the truth was out, Poplar Fruit finally felt relieved. Since he knew who it was, he could find a way to solve it. Poplar Fruit secretly clenched his fist. Then he would run to the capital. No official was clean. He didn't believe that he couldn't get rid of him. Poplar Fruit restarted the car and drove on the road. He said, "You don't have to blame yourself too much. I don't blame you, really." Zheng Yujie smiled at Poplar Fruit and said, "That won't do. This thing happened because of me, so I have to be responsible for solving it." "How will you solve it?" Before Poplar Fruit's voice died away, Zheng Yujie had already taken out her mobile phone from her bag and dialed a number. Poplar Fruit wanted to continue to ask, but Zheng Yujie's first words scared him, and he didn't dare to speak. "Mom, it's me." Although he didn't know why Zheng Yujie called her mother, Poplar Fruit quickly closed his mouth and focused on driving his car. Kiki saw that Zheng Yujie was on the phone and suddenly became interested. Chapter 304. Phone. Kiki excitedly waved her little hands and rubbed against Zheng Yujia's body. She said in a childish voice, "Can I give it to Kiki?" Zheng Yujia's expression changed. She bitterly explained to the phone, "Mom, no, I'm at my friend's place." "Yes, he has a child." Zheng Yujia took a moment to glare at Poplar Fruit, as if to say, "Look at your precious daughter. She almost killed me." Poplar Fruit laughed silently. He took out his iPhone from the armrest and handed it to Kiki. Since the screen was locked, Kiki wouldn't be able to use it even if she took it. Taking her father's phone, Chi-Chi happily sat in Zheng Yujia's arms and played with it. Kiki didn't care. She felt that it was good enough to have a phone for her to play with. Thus, she didn't say anything to interrupt Zheng Yujia's call. Zheng Yujia sighed and continued to talk to her mother. "Yes, I'm on vacation. I'm in Guangzhou." "Hey, why you care so much?" "I'm in Guangzhou for vacation." Zheng Yujia replied impatiently. Yes, my friend. I met him at work." "Why do you care if he's a man or a woman?" "He's a man, okay. He's in his 60s. He's older than you." Zheng Yujia blinked at Poplar Fruit and continued to lie. "Stop it. I have something important to talk to you about." Zheng Yujia said, "It's very, very urgent." "Yes. Does our family have any connections in Guangdong?" Zheng Yujia asked. "You don't have to care about what it is. Just give me his contact. I want to ask him for a favor. It's really nothing. Don't make wild guesses. I'll be back after my vacation." Zheng Yujia kissed the phone and said, "Okay, just send me his contact information. I'll hang up. See you later. Love you. Mwax." The moi made Poplar Fruit feel cold. His eyes widened and his hands tightly gripped the steering wheel. He didn't dare to relax, afraid that Zheng Yujia would scare him into driving into a ditch. "Laugh. Zheng Yujia said unhappily. "I know you want to laugh. My mom and I talk like sisters. Are you happy now?" Poplar Fruit laughed dryly. He scratched his head and said, "No, it's not a problem. I just felt that the way you spoke was different from your usual personality." "Then what do you like?" Zheng Yujia suddenly turned and looked at Poplar Fruit. Poplar Fruit didn't know how to answer. The atmosphere suddenly became very awkward, but fortunately, Zheng Yujia's phone suddenly rang. It was a text message from her mother. Thank God, her mother saved Poplar Fruit. "Yang Dang, this is my dad's old subordinate." Zheng Yujia looked at the phone screen and said casually, "When I was young, he often came to visit my home. Now, he is a senior official in Guangdong province. He should be able to help." Poplar Fruit was a little surprised. Zheng Yujia's father's subordinate was already a senior official. Then, wouldn't her father's position be even higher? Dialing the private number given by her mother, Zheng Yujia's voice suddenly became a little soft. "Hello, is this Yang Dang, Uncle Yang?" Poplar Fruit concentrated on driving, but he still listened carefully. This matter was related to the safety of his brother-in-law. Poplar Fruit had to pay attention. "I am Zheng Yujia, Zheng Mingxing's daughter." Zheng Yujia smiled. "Yes, I am little Yujia. You still remember me." "Zheng Mingxing?" Poplar Fruit suddenly felt that he had heard this name before. He carefully searched his mind and finally found the answer in a report. Zheng Mingxing. This is also a senior official in a big province in the north. Compared to a senior official, Zheng Mingxing's position is much higher. After all, the latter sits on the top seat and has a lot of power. Haha, I came to Guangdong province to play, but not in Guangzhou. Zheng Yujia smiled. "Well, I will definitely visit your house when I have time. It's like this. Today, I would like to ask Uncle Yang to help me with something." Zheng Yujia briefly explained the matter to Yang Dang. Then, she said, "Don't worry, my friend's relatives are decent businessmen. They absolutely abide by the law. It's just that those people directly arrested people without distinguishing between right and wrong. If it's a violation of the law, then I wouldn't dare to ask you for help. Otherwise, my father will beat me to death." Well, then I will have to trouble you to ask." Zheng Yujia smiled. "Okay, no problem. I will visit your house before I return to Beijing. At that time, I hope anyone won't think that I am disturbing you." "Well, that's it then. I will wait for your good news." "Thank you, Uncle Yang. Bye-bye." Poplar Fruit looked at Zheng Yujie from the corner of his eyes. He couldn't wait to ask, "How is it?" "No problem." Zheng Yujie stretched her waist and yawned. Then she lazily said, "Uncle Yang agreed to help." "Oh, right, the two of you are from the same family. Can he really help?" Poplar Fruit hesitated for a moment before he asked, "That Lisa Chow you mentioned, his family should be very powerful, right?" "His family used to be very powerful. They are the second generation of the Red family," Zheng Yujie said. "But now they are very ordinary. If I remember correctly, his family is only at the level of a department in Guangdong province. He is Lisa Chow's third uncle. They definitely won't fight with a high official on this matter. It's not that they don't dare, but it's not worth it. Don't worry. Let's wait for the good news." Zheng Yujie hesitated for a moment before she said, "This matter started because of me. I still have to apologize to your brother-in-law." "What are you talking about?" Poplar Fruit unhappily said, "I already said that we shouldn't feel sorry for ourselves. This matter is not your fault nor mine. We are good friends, so don't say such things." "Then you don't treat me as a friend." Zheng Yujie turned her head and seriously said to Poplar Fruit, "How do I not treat you as a friend?" Poplar Fruit asked, puzzled. "You said that such a big thing happened to you in the past few days, and you didn't even tell me. If you told me earlier, wouldn't everything be fine?" Zheng Yujie unhappily said. Her coquettish appearance made Poplar Fruit feel a little uncomfortable. Scratching his head, Poplar Fruit awkwardly said, "I didn't think of looking for you. You are in Beijing, so far away. You think that it's useless to look for me, right?" Zheng Yujie rushed to say, "If you don't tell me, how do you know it's useless? And if there's something, shouldn't we discuss how to deal with it? You and I are in different places, so far away. If you don't tell me when something happens, I can't help you even if I want to. Why do you always have to shoulder it alone?" Zheng Yujie paused for a moment before she said the last sentence. "If you don't tell me, I will feel even worse." When this sentence was said, the atmosphere in the car suddenly became very ambiguous. Poplar Fruit didn't know how to answer, and Zheng Yujie also became silent. "I'm sorry." After a long time, Poplar Fruit sighed and said, "Everyone, use your votes to smash the poor, greater than over equal to." Chapter 305. The ambiguous atmosphere in the car continued all the way to the county. It wasn't until Poplar Fruit drove the car into the county street that Zheng Yujie's phone rang, that the awkward scene suddenly melted like ice. Zheng Yujie's face changed. She gestured to Poplar Fruit, then picked up the phone and said, "Hello, Dad." It was actually Zheng Mingxing calling. Poplar Fruit suddenly sat up straight. "I didn't cause any trouble. It was Lisa Chow, that kid, who provoked me," Zheng Yujie said discontentedly. "I asked Uncle Yang for help, but Lisa Chow vented his anger on my friends and family." "Friends are friends. Why are you always so nosy like my mom?" Zheng Yujie was a little guilty. She pretended to be fierce and muttered, "It's not a big deal. You are busy every day, so don't worry about it. Anyway, Uncle Yang can help solve it." Zheng Yujie said, "Okay, you can rest assured. I'm old now. I won't cause you any trouble. Bye." Zheng Yujie hung up the phone and sighed. It seemed that her father gave her a lot of pressure. Poplar Fruit didn't need to ask. He could tell from Zheng Yujie's words that Yang Dang must have found something and asked Zheng Mingsheng if he should help. Then Zheng Mingsheng called to ask why Zheng Yujie did things in his name. "It's okay." Zheng Yujie calmed down and said to Poplar Fruit, "There won't be a problem." Sure enough, in less than 10 minutes, Yang Dang's call came. "Good news." After Zheng Yujie put down the phone, she happily said to Poplar Fruit, "It's been solved." "So fast?" Poplar Fruit asked, stunned. "Yes, so fast." Zheng Yujie smiled. At this time, Poplar Fruit had just arrived in front of the county's Public Security Bureau. His phone rang, vibrating and making sounds. Kiki was shocked and almost threw her under the seat. Poplar Fruit quickly found a place to park on the right. He took the phone and found that it was Chun Longjiang calling. "Poplar Fruit, your brother-in-law was released," Chun Longjiang said gloomily. "Released? I just arrived at the Public Security Bureau, Poplar Fruit said in surprise. Where is he now? You are in front of the Public Security Bureau? That's good. He will be out. Chen Longjiang laughed. Oh, okay. Thank you for your help. Yang was smiled. How did I help? Chen Longjiang smiled bitterly. Did you look for He Wenjua? That's fast. The Provincial Public Security Bureau directly called my subordinates to release him. I think the city has just received the notice. Yes, I found someone. Poplar Fruit scratched his head and did not elaborate. I didn't expect it to be resolved so quickly. He was released before I arrived. It's really official. We ran until our legs broke. No matter how you look at it, it's our fault. Chen Longjiang was probably scolded as he complained. Secretary Chen, I'm sorry for implicating you. Poplar Fruit awkwardly apologized. That's fine. Chen Longjiang suddenly felt refreshed. He laughed and said, I'm happy to be scolded. Anyway, I've been holding in for so long. Today, I'm so happy to see the investigation team go back with their tails between their legs. Chen Longjiang had long been dissatisfied with those arrogant and condescending fellows. This time, in the conference room, he could finally see them being reprimanded. His heart was overjoyed. Although he had been implicated, it was worth it. They're released. Poplar Fruit happily said to Zheng Yujia, Let's get out of the car and wait for a while. The car had been driven for a long time, so there was an unpleasant smell of plastic. Zheng Yujia did not want to stay any longer, so she walked out with Poplar Fruit and waited at the entrance of the Public Security Bureau. Poplar Fruit took the time to call his sister and found out that Yang Ping was even faster. The Bureau of Industry and Commerce had already informed them that everything was fine and the seal of the shop had been removed. Because the shop was turned into a mess, Poplar Fruit comforted his sister and told her to clean up the shop with the staff. He would go back after picking up his brother-in-law. When Yang Chengwan came out, other than his clothes being wrinkled because of the initial push, he was fine everywhere else. He was full of energy and did not feel depressed at all after being locked up. The person who accompanied him out was the director of the county bureau. Thanks to his help and care, Yang Chengwan did not suffer much in the past few hours. However, the director seemed to have a military background. He had a lot to talk about with Yang Chengwan. The two of them walked out while talking and laughing. My wife's brother is here. Director Gong, thank you so much for today. Yang Chengwan shook hands with the director and smiled. Are you free today? I'll treat you to a drink. I didn't help much. Chengwan, don't flatter me. Director Gong laughed and said, I can't today. You know, there's still a few men in the bureau who haven't been sent away. Yang Chengwan smiled knowingly, shook Director Gong's hand, and said, Okay, I won't bother you today. Let's meet again later. Yang Chengwan said goodbye to Director Gong and walked over to Poplar Fruit. Brother-in-law, why did you enter the bureau as casually as having a meal? Poplar Fruit joked with a smile. You even put your arm around the director's shoulder. Hey, you can't talk nonsense. Yang Chengwan looked around, then looked at Zheng Yujia behind Poplar Fruit and asked, Hey, Fruit, why don't you introduce him? As he spoke, he glanced at Poplar Fruit, and his eyes revealed an ambiguous look. Poplar Fruit ignored Yang Chengwan's gaze and introduced them in Mandarin. Yujia, this is my brother-in-law, Yang Chengwan. This is Zheng Yujia, my friend. Yujia can't understand our native language. We all speak in Mandarin now. Zheng Yujia said with some embarrassment, Brother Yang, I'm sorry. In fact, this matter happened because of me. Didn't you say not to mention it? Besides, if it weren't for your help, how could my brother-in-law be released so quickly? Poplar Fruit pulled her and said unhappily. He didn't quite understand the relationship, but Yang Chengwan still vaguely guessed that this matter should have something to do with Poplar Fruit and Zheng Yujia. He laughed and said, Don't say any more. Let bygones be bygones. I'm fine, aren't I? Well, you just mentioned eating. I suddenly feel very hungry. Yang Chengwan touched his stomach, and suddenly there was a roaring sound from his stomach. I haven't eaten for lunch. Poplar Fruit, do you have anything to eat in the car? I'm hungry too. Zheng Yujia hugged Kiki and said with a red face. Kiki is hungry too. Kiki shouted, not to be outdone. Haha, we didn't eat lunch. Poplar Fruit laughed and said, Then let's go pick up our sister now and then go to a big restaurant to have a big meal. Everyone, use your votes to support the poor. Greater than over equal to. Chapter 306. After dinner and returning the car, Poplar Fruit and Zheng Yujie returned home in the evening. Living in a big city, it was difficult for people to feel a sense of distance because of the fast transportation. Even between Beijing and Shanghai, it was just a blink of an eye by plane. But in the countryside, the sense of distance was magnified by dozens of times. Even though she was driving a car instead of a motorcycle, and even though the distance between the county town and the village was only about 40 kilometers, Zheng Yujie still felt sore all over and yawned repeatedly after the long journey. That's because you didn't rest well in the afternoon. Poplar Fruit ignored Zheng Yujie's resentful eyes and pointed out with a smile. And you sit all day and don't exercise. Wake up early tomorrow and go out with me. Yawning was contagious. When Zheng Yujie yawned, Kiki also opened her mouth and yawned. She was also tired and didn't sleep in the afternoon. Looking at her sleepy eyes, it was obvious that she was very sleepy. But after the yawn, Chi-Chi and Zheng Yujie looked at each other for a moment before laughing heartily. Kiki seemed to have forgotten the injuries she suffered in the morning. If it weren't for the bruises on her face, Poplar Fruit would have thought that there was something wrong with her memory. When they were in the county, her sister Yang Ping saw her niece like this. She was so angry that she wanted to pick up a kitchen knife and rush home to fight. It took a lot of effort to persuade her. Yang Chengwan and Yang Ping couldn't come back tonight. After such a thing happened, they still had to tidy up. Since everything was fine, they had to hurry up and get the restaurant back open. The later they opened, the less income they had. You're back just in time. I've already prepared the meal. Entering the courtyard, Su Jinfeng, who was busy in the kitchen, looked up and smiled. She spoke Cantonese very well, but Mandarin was a little awkward. But fortunately, Zheng Yujie could understand. Auntie, I won't be eating tonight. I just ate 2 hours ago. I'll go up and sleep. Zheng Yujie said as she patted her mouth and yawned. Oh, that's okay. I'll take some food out and put it in the fridge. Whenever you want to eat, just ask Guazi to heat it up for you. Su Jinfeng said enthusiastically. Guazi, quickly go up and take care of the girl. Mom, she doesn't want to eat, but I want to eat. Poplar Fruit laughed. Tell me how to use your bathroom first before coming down to eat. Zheng Yujie blushed as she pulled Poplar Fruit upstairs. She didn't feel awkward when she said that. The main reason for her blushing face was that Su Jinfeng was looking at them too ambiguously. There are 2 bathrooms on the 2nd floor. Our bathroom is the same as the toilet. After going upstairs, Poplar Fruit laughed. One of the bathrooms is in my room, and the other is at the end of the corridor. It's the common toilet on this floor. Go to your room. Go to your room. Zheng Yujie was behind Poplar Fruit and pushed Poplar Fruit lightly. Your room is too big, Zheng Yujie exclaimed. How many square meters is this? 70 or 80? It's not that exaggerated. Poplar Fruit laughed. At most 60. Compared to the large space, the furniture inside was still a little sparse. This time, they only added a TV, a sofa, and a coffee table. In fact, Zheng Yujie had seen bigger rooms before. But because this room had less furniture, it looked a little bigger. Yang's room looked pretty decent. It was tiled and cleaned, unlike the living room on the 1st floor. When you walked in and out, you would find dirt in the crevices. The living conditions in the countryside are good. Your house, if sold in Beijing, would be worth at least a few million. Zheng Yujie said exaggeratedly. Poplar Fruit didn't answer her. He took Zheng Yujie to the bathroom, turned on the light, and said, I'll give you a new towel later. You can use anything inside. He scratched his head and said, as for the bathtub, I haven't used it before. If you want to take a bath, you can use it after a rinse. I want to take a bubble bath. Zheng Yujie was as excited as a little girl. She opened her arms and spun around happily. Hee, you close the door and take a bath. I'll go feed Kiki some dinner and wash up. She's also going to sleep. Poplar Fruit laughed. Kiki ate a little porridge. She ate it while her head was still dizzy. If it wasn't for the fragrance of meat floating in the porridge, Kiki wouldn't be able to eat it. In the end, She didn't take a bath. Poplar Fruit wiped Kiki's body with a hot, wet towel. When wiping her face, Poplar Fruit was very careful. He didn't dare to touch Kiki's swollen marks. He didn't even dare to touch the surrounding skin. There were two incongruous bruises on one side of her white and tender face. Poplar Fruit's heart ached. Back in his bedroom, Poplar Fruit turned on the light. He found that Zheng Yujia had actually crawled into his bed and fallen asleep. The bed was so big that it could fit 3 people, but the middle of the bed was arched. Zheng Yujia hugged her pillow, revealing her white and bare arms. She slept very soundly. Damn, why didn't she go back to her room? Poplar Fruit muttered to himself. He scratched his head and stood at the door. After the experience at the hotel last year, Poplar Fruit didn't dare to lift Zheng Yujia's quilt or touch her when she was sleeping. This girl was too wild when she was sleeping. Who knew if she was wearing any clothes underneath? What should I do? Poplar Fruit could only put his daughter, who was already asleep, in the crib. He went down to eat and then came up to take a bath. It seemed like the turtle dove had to sleep in a magpie's nest. At night, Poplar Fruit was still worried. After waking up in the middle of the night, he went back to his room to check on Kiki. Sure enough, Kiki was sweating profusely and twisting around. He didn't know if it was because she was having a nightmare. Poplar Fruit hurriedly carried Kiki and returned to the guest room. Because it was very cold in the countryside in the early morning, Poplar Fruit hurriedly crawled into bed. He hugged Kiki and gently comforted her. Feeling the familiar heartbeat of her father, Kiki slowly stopped moving around. Her breathing also gradually calmed down. Unable to sleep, Poplar Fruit sat beside his daughter and practiced his internal strength for a while. He felt the shallow flow of energy circulating in his body. Recently, his internal strength had made great progress. He didn't know if it was because of the breakthrough in the intent realm of Xing martial arts, but the energy of the past seemed to have become a trickle. It seems to be a bit more powerful. Poplar Fruit muttered in his heart. Although he didn't grow taller and more handsome like before, his body seemed to be surging with energy. It felt like there was an inexhaustible energy. That's right. Poplar Fruit raised his eyebrows. He had forgotten that he had read a novel in high school. It said that internal strength could be used to heal injuries. In the dark night, Poplar Fruit slowly opened his eyes that were as deep as the starry sky. He looked at his daughter, who was sleeping in his arms. He frowned and began to think. Chapter 307. Give it a try? Poplar Fruit hesitated for a moment, then reached out to turn on the bedside lamp and carefully looked at the bruises on his daughter's face. It was still as shocking as before. Yangwa's heart ached as she gently stroked her daughter's left cheek. Giving it a try was not that simple. Regardless of whether it was effective or not, Poplar Fruit's internal strength was circulating in his body. If he wanted to use it on his daughter, how could he use it? That was the problem. Racking his brain, Poplar Fruit carefully searched through his memories. It seemed that he had found a trace of the image that appeared in his consciousness when Kiki was born last year in the hospital. Think again, think again. Although Poplar Fruit's memory was extraordinary, it was still very difficult to find the information that could not be determined from a sea of information. Could it be this? Poplar Fruit frowned. It was his first time coming into contact with this kind of knowledge, and there was no one he could ask. He decided to give it a try himself. She entered his dantian. Poplar Fruit gently closed his eyes. His nose was at his mouth was at his heart, and his tongue was at his hip. His mind seemed to be immersed in his own body. He had done this countless times, but it was the introspection method. He could observe the internal strength circulating in his body, along the sea of qi, through the navel, and up to the shanzhong. Poplar Fruit silently recited the incantation, silently directing the trickle of energy in his body to flow along this path. Go up the glabella, stop the bai wei, go down the panting path, go down the yang gate. The internal strength in Poplar Fruit's body slowly flowed, according to the Poplar Fruit's consciousness, and finally gathered at the acupuncture point near the Poplar Fruit's palm. There was still one more step. The internal strength was still hidden in his body and could not be released. Poplar Fruit stirred his dantian, continuously accumulating his inner strength to the 2 acupoints on his right palm. The accumulation of chi finally exploded. Poplar Fruit suddenly waved his arm towards the empty space on his right side. There's only a pa sound, and there was a slight tingling sensation at the tiger gate in the center of his palm. However, what followed was the smooth flow of chi through the acupoints on his right arm. Poplar Fruit could feel that although his internal energy had already flowed back into his body and continued to circulate according to its previous trajectory, as long as he wanted, it could definitely return. Thinking about it now, the Poplar Fruit once again activated his internal strength and gradually gathered it in his right palm. At first, it was still hidden in his palm. Later, with a thought from the Poplar Fruit, a layer of internal strength gently floated out and covered his palm like a layer of plastic wrap. It really works. Poplar Fruit was overjoyed, but he hadn't lost his mind. He couldn't just give it to his daughter so rashly. He decided to use his own skin to feel it first. Tai Chi's internal strength was a kind of smooth and gentle cultivation method. It implied the way of heaven and earth. If the user didn't have the intention to hurt others, then it was a cultivation method to protect oneself. Poplar Fruit's current feeling was exactly as he had guessed. He gently rubbed his right palm, covered with a layer of internal strength on his thigh. It felt like a spring breeze, only a little warm and comfortable, without any other sharp feeling. There were no scars on his body, so he didn't know if this internal strength would have any effect. However, it seemed that even if it didn't have any effect, there wouldn't be any problems. Therefore, Poplar Fruit decided to let Kiki give it a try. Using internal strength out of the body was a method that consumed a lot of energy. If it was before Poplar Fruit, it was estimated that he wouldn't be able to hold on for more than a minute. Fortunately, now that he had condensed his chi into a flow, Poplar Fruit felt that he could still hold on for more than 10 minutes. Gently picking up Kiki and letting her lie in his arms, Poplar Fruit carefully stretched out his right hand and used his internal strength to touch Kiki's face. It seemed that Kiki didn't feel any discomfort. Poplar Fruit was relieved and moved closer. Poplar Fruit's palm hadn't touched Kiki's left face, but through his internal strength, Poplar Fruit could feel the touch of his daughter's face. Logically speaking, the effect of force was mutual. Poplar Fruit could feel it, so should Kiki. The place he touched was Kiki's scar. Poplar Fruit gently rubbed it and then stopped, worriedly observing Kiki's reaction. What surprised Poplar Fruit was that Kiki didn't wake up from the pain. Instead, her slightly wrinkled eyebrows seemed to loosen a little. Looking again at Kiki's left face with a blue scar, Poplar Fruit raised his eyelids in surprise. It was amazing. Poplar Fruit remembered that Kiki's left face was swollen, but now Poplar Fruit saw that it was a little better than before. Did he feel wrong? Poplar Fruit was in disbelief. He increased the output of his internal strength and then gently rubbed Kiki's face, as if he was applying medicine to an injury. This time, Poplar Fruit was very focused on paying attention to the blue scar on Kiki's face. Under Poplar Fruit's careful caressing, the 2 blue scars really did slowly fade, although the speed was invisible to the naked eye. But after just over a minute, Poplar Fruit could see that the blue scar had smoothed out, the red swelling around it had also faded, and the delicate skin of the past like ice and snow had reappeared. Chi-Chi was so comfortable in her sleep that she let out a groan, and her little feet unconsciously moved. It worked. It really worked. Poplar Fruit was wild with joy. He didn't care about consuming nearly half of his internal strength and continued to massage Kiki. In order to let Kiki completely recover, Poplar Fruit couldn't do it in one breath. He had almost exhausted all of his internal strength. Poplar Fruit was also able to fade the blue scar on Kiki's face. In the end, only a faint trace could be seen. There should still be some extravasated blood inside, but Poplar Fruit was already close to exhausting his internal strength. He quickly stopped. There was still a little bit left, but it didn't matter. If he healed too quickly, others would notice the problem. Wait a bit, Tomorrow night, when he recovered his internal strength, he would help Kiki completely digest this little bit of extravasated blood. Hugh, Poplar Fruit gasped for breath. He had never felt so tired before. Even when he worked in the fields with his parents when he was young, he wasn't this tired, because this kind of tiredness was both mental and physical. Kiki felt very comfortable because of her father's hard work. In her sleep, she actually revealed a sweet, angelic smile. Poplar Fruit was just about to retract his right hand when Kiki suddenly hugged him. She gently rubbed her little left cheek that she had just cured and then hugged him tightly. Poplar Fruit was stunned for a moment. Then a kind smile appeared on his face. For a father, no matter how tired he was, he couldn't give up his daughter's attachment. Leaning against the bed, Poplar Fruit adjusted the pillow and then pulled up the quilt to cover himself and Kiki. He gently hugged Kiki closer and stroked his daughter's hair with his left hand. Then he closed his eyes. Too tired, Poplar Fruit also wanted to sleep again. Although he wasn't in a meditative position, and although he wasn't lying down properly, Poplar Fruit's internal strength moved according to his will. It circulated twice and gathered a pitifully small stream, slowly nourishing Poplar Fruit's almost exhausted dantian. Chapter 308. Poplar Fruit. Zheng Yujie rushed in from the door and pushed open the door. The bright sunlight shone directly into Poplar Fruit's eyes. "Oh, what's wrong?" Poplar Fruit rubbed his eyes and stretched. "Didn't you tell me to get up early this morning to take me out for a walk?" Zheng Yujie stood by the bed with her hands on her waist and angrily said, "I specially got up early, but I waited for you for an hour and still didn't see you." Today, Zheng Yujie wore a casual sportswear. She didn't look as imposing as yesterday, but Poplar Fruit didn't think highly of her white sportswear. In the countryside, white clothes are easy to get dirty, and in Poplar Fruit's quilt suddenly wriggled. Lifting up the quilt, Kiki's hair was messy. She squinted her eyes and supported herself on her father's chest. She rubbed her sleepy eyes with one hand and turned her head. She still couldn't figure out what was going on. "You went to bed early last night, but I didn't go to bed that early." Poplar Fruit lifted up the quilt, picked up Kiki, and walked out of the bed with a smile. He didn't have the habit of taking off his clothes to sleep, so Zheng Yujie looked at him and didn't scream. But what's with that expression? Why does it give people a sense of loss? Poplar Fruit hasn't slept in for a long time. If it wasn't for the fact that his internal energy was exhausted, he wouldn't need to spend so much time to replenish his energy. Zheng Yujie seemed to have discovered a new continent. She came over and looked at Kiki. "Don't look." Kiki probably felt that she didn't wash her face or comb her hair in the morning, so she shyly covered her face and whispered, "Ha ha." Poplar Fruit laughed happily. "Poplar Fruit, did you not see it?" Zheng Yujie ignored Poplar Fruit's laughter. She pointed at Kiki and said, "It seems that Kiki's face is not as swollen as before." Poplar Fruit pretended to be surprised and asked, "Really?" He held up his daughter's face and persuaded Kiki to let go of her hand so that he could take a look. He found that Kiki's little face seemed to be a little better than after his treatment last night. "It's probably because children have a faster recovery ability," Poplar Fruit explained with a smile. "Can you give me something to eat after you wash up?" Zheng Yujie followed Poplar Fruit downstairs and said, "I didn't eat anything last night. I'm starving." She didn't regard herself as an outsider at all. She was carefree, just like when she first met Poplar Fruit. "No problem." Poplar Fruit smiled and went to the kitchen first. He took out the vegetables that his mother left for them yesterday from the fridge and sniffed them. They were not bad, so he put them in the big pot, added some water, and started to steam them. "I'll wash my face first. When the dishes are ready, I'll cook the noodles." Poplar Fruit smiled. Poplar Fruit wiped Kiki's face with a wet towel. The well water was not very cold, so Poplar Fruit did not deliberately boil water. Kiki was wiped by the cool towel, and her spirit was suddenly refreshed. She slept well last night, so Kiki's anger when she woke up was gone. She let her father move her around and smiled happily. Poplar Fruit carefully wiped the corners of Kiki's eyes, nose, and ears. He also tried to wipe the left side of Kiki's face where the bruise was last night. Kiki did not feel any pain, unlike yesterday when her whole body shrank when touched. This made Poplar Fruit relieved a lot. Do you know how to ride a motorcycle? Putting down the bowl, Poplar Fruit smiled and asked Zheng Yujie. Zheng Yujie shook her head and then nodded. What do you mean? Poplar Fruit asked puzzledly. I've ridden a motorcycle before, but I'm a little scared, Zheng Yujie said with a red face. Motorcycles were rarely seen in Beijing. She had ridden in the place where her father was in politics once, so she did not have much experience. That's okay, you just need to support me. Poplar Fruit laughed and said, I don't know how to drive very fast. Poplar Fruit went back to the house and asked his father for the car key. Then, under his mother's strange gaze, Poplar Fruit fled. Because Zheng Yujie was not familiar with riding, Poplar Fruit went upstairs and took a strap that he had not used for a long time. He tied Kiki, who was playing happily with Goldie, to his chest. And Kiki protested, I want to play with Goldie. Don't you want to go for a ride? Poplar Fruit asked with a smile. Kiki's eyes lit up. She knew what the word ride meant. She stopped making a fuss and nodded seriously. Go, Kiki wants to go. That's it. Poplar Fruit smiled and put a small flower hat on Kiki's head. Poplar Fruit pushed the motorcycle out of the yard. Goldie wagged its tail and wanted to follow, but Poplar Fruit pushed it back and locked it in the house. They were riding a motorcycle, so they could not bring Goldie. Poplar Fruit got on the motorcycle first. When Kiki saw the motorcycle, she became even more excited. She sat in the strap and kept twisting. Poplar Fruit's left hand loosened the grip and pressed the restless Kiki on his chest. He smiled and said, Don't move. Otherwise, I'll leave you at home to accompany Goldie. This time, Chi-Chi didn't dare to squirm anymore. Sit on it and hold my waist. Poplar Fruit smiled. Although Zheng Yujie was a little scared, she had always been brave. Otherwise, she would not have driven a Maserati. After hearing Poplar Fruit's command, she swung her long right leg in the air and easily got on the motorcycle. Then, she put her hands on Poplar Fruit's waist. Put your feet here. After Poplar Fruit taught Zheng Yujie, he started the motorcycle and slowly drove forward. How is it? Don't be so nervous. Poplar Fruit smiled. He felt that Zheng Yujie's hands on his waist were a little tight. He comforted her and said, I'm driving very steadily. At this time, a young man with half of his trousers rolled up came from the village road. He had a cigarette in his mouth and greeted them with a smirk. Uncle Gua, are you taking Aunt Gua to the market? He was speaking in Poplar Fruit's hometown dialect. To go to the market meant to go to the market. He was younger than Poplar Fruit, but in terms of seniority, he was one generation behind Poplar Fruit, so he called Poplar Fruit Uncle Gua. Get lost. Don't talk nonsense. This is my friend. He's here to play. Poplar Fruit laughed and scolded. The young man just smiled and slipped away. What did he say? Zheng Yujie whispered into Poplar Fruit's ear. Nothing. Poplar Fruit was too embarrassed to translate, so he said evasively, it must be nothing good. Zheng Yujie could hear that the young man was teasing her from his tone, so she said with dissatisfaction, Faster, faster. Kiki patted her father's arm and said. She was a little dissatisfied with Poplar Fruit's snail-like speed. Yesterday, when she went out with Grandma and Dad, he drove so fast, but now he couldn't even pick up the wind. She didn't feel anything at all. Don't rush. Poplar Fruit said leisurely. Once we get out of the village and onto a flatter road, we'll drive a little faster. The village road was a little bumpy, and sometimes there were piles of cow dung on the motorcycle. Poplar Fruit didn't dare to drive too fast. Otherwise, Zheng Yujie, who hadn't adapted yet, would be jolted off, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Please use your votes to support the poor, greater than over equal to. Chapter 309. The sun was shining brightly, and the spring breeze was warm. The crops in the fields were fresh and tender, and the green insects in the leaves and soil attracted a lot of chirping birds. A few farmers were busy weeding in the fields, and the big yellow cow that was tied under a crooked tree gnawed on the grass. It raised its head and coveted the big cow on the other side of the field. It wagged its tail and couldn't wait to tear open the rope binding it and ride it. Spring was a good season for all living things to come back to life. Woo-woo. Poplar Fruit's motorcycle screamed as it sped along the asphalt path, leaving only Zhang Yujia's high-pitched screams. Big sister, be reserved, be reserved. Can we not scream so loudly? People will think that I'm kidnapping a woman. Poplar Fruit said helplessly as he lowered his head and looked at the lotus arms that were tightly wrapped around his waist. Ever since they left the village, Poplar Fruit drove at about 40 kilometers per hour. Zhang Yujia became nervous. Not only did she cling to Poplar Fruit's body, but she also hugged Poplar Fruit tightly and screamed nonstop, as if the car was about to fall. Based on unscientific and inaccurate statistics, Zhang Yujia was so scared that 5 little birds flew and crashed into trees, and 30 green locusts that were in the middle of breeding were so scared that they immediately withered. In fact, Poplar Fruit could be said to be in pain and joy at the same time. Although it was very embarrassing, Zhang Yujia hugged Poplar Fruit so tightly that he was a little distracted. The 2 soft meatballs on his back were really too distracting. Zhang Yujia was the only one who screamed, but she also aroused Kiki's interest, and Kiki also started to scream. It was as if the 2 of them were competing to see who was louder. Kiki was practically screaming at the top of her lungs. Her screams were so sharp that even Poplar Fruit couldn't stand it. He couldn't let go of one hand to cover Kiki's mouth, but he didn't know if she would have a stomachache at night if too much wind entered her mouth. Poplar Fruit regretted that he didn't turn Kiki around to face him. However, it was obvious that Kiki and Zhang Yujia's screams were different in nature. Zhang Yujia screamed out of fear and maybe a little bit of uncontrollable excitement, but Kiki screamed out of joy. A father knows his daughter best. Poplar Fruit knew his precious daughter very well. Not only was she not afraid, she actually liked the feeling of speed. In fact, the faster and more exciting it was, the better. I'm driving slowly, so don't scream. Poplar Fruit came to the back of the mountain and began to slow down as he comforted them. Zhang Yujia obediently stopped screaming, but she still didn't relax her arms around Poplar Fruit's waist. Poplar Fruit was focused on driving, so he didn't see the expression on Zhang Yujia's face. At this time, Zhang Yujia didn't know if it was because of the wind or something else, but her face was slightly red. She gently leaned her head against Poplar Fruit's broad back and smelled the scent coming from Poplar Fruit's body. She felt a little drunk. At this moment, she forgot everything about the distant capital, work, family, disputes. She only wanted to cherish this hug. It was like in a dream. Yes, they had hugged many times in their dreams, and in reality, this was the first time, right? In fact, there was one time, and that was when Zhang Yujia first met Poplar Fruit last year. She was drunk, and Poplar Fruit carried her back. Zhang Yujia was similar at that time, and now, she wrapped Poplar Fruit tightly, but she didn't remember. The wind blew her hair into a mess, but that was no longer important. Zhang Yujia's mouth revealed a trace of a silly smile that she didn't notice. Her heart was very happy, and she hoped that this moment wouldn't end too early. How should she say it? Otherwise, she would spend the rest of her life in this car. However, silly girl, how could she spend the rest of her life in a car? No matter how long the road was, it would be finished eventually. We're here. Poplar Fruit smiled and patted Zhang Yujia's hands that were hugging his waist and said, "What's wrong? It's just a motorcycle. Why are you so scared?" Poplar Fruit's voice pulled Zhang Yujia out of her fantasy. She raised her head, and her blurred eyes met with Poplar Fruit's, and the blush on her face deepened. However, she was Zhang Yujia, and she had always been mentally strong. She stroked her messy hair with both hands to hide her expression and pretended that nothing had happened as she stepped off the car. "Hey, where is this?" Zhang Yujia discovered that Poplar Fruit had brought her to a completely unfamiliar environment. Behind her was a dense forest with weeds as the path, and deep in the bushes, there were a few blooming flowers. In front of her was a cliff, which was dozens of steps away from where she stood. Although she couldn't see the scenery on the other side, she could clearly hear the crashing sound of the waves. "The sea?" Zhang Yujia asked in surprise. Poplar Fruit didn't answer. He smiled and nodded. Quick, let's go and take a look. Zheng Yujie pulled Poplar Fruit's arm and said excitedly. Poplar Fruit parked the motorcycle next to a big tree, then locked it, and led Zheng Yujie toward the cliff. Be careful, Poplar Fruit said softly. After passing through the forest, there was no road left, and as far as the eye could see, there were craggy rocks. Although they were scattered, these rocks were actually one with the whole hill, but after tens of thousands of years of wind and rain, they became what they were today. Worried that Zheng Yujie would be unsteady on the rocks and sprain her ankle, Poplar Fruit reached out to help Zheng Yujie walk forward. Although Zheng Yujie could walk by herself if she was careful, she still happily accepted Poplar Fruit's consideration. After climbing more than 10 meters of rocks, Poplar Fruit and Zheng Yujie came to the edge of the cliff and saw the blue sea in the distance. Under the morning sun, the rolling waves reflected the sparkling waves. The sea. Zheng Yujie excitedly stood there and shouted loudly. Zheng Yujie had seen the sea in the north, but after all, the place where she lived was not near the sea. Seeing the sea again, her mood was indescribably happy. Papa, what is the sea? Kiki curiously asked. Kiki, this is the sea. Zheng Yujie snatched Poplar Fruit's words, took Kiki's little hand, and happily said while pointing to the distance. The sea breeze was very strong. Kiki's eyes narrowed. It was her first time seeing the ocean, but the vast and boundless ocean surface was truly spectacular. Chi-Chi also began to look at it greedily. Seagull! Seagull! Zheng Yujie excitedly shouted. If it wasn't for the danger here and Poplar Fruit holding her down, she would have happily jumped up. Zheng Yujie quickly pointed to the white, flying objects gliding on the sea and introduced them to Kiki. There's an island nearby. They're all nesting on it. Poplar Fruit said to Zheng Yujie with a smile. Oh. Kiki happily sat in front of Poplar Fruit, vigorously waved her little hand, and imitated Zheng Yujie's cry, but she seemed to have not learned this term yet. Chapter 3:10. Zheng Yujie's eyes flashed with a trace of emotion and affection. For her, she wasn't afraid of the difficulties and bumps in the road of pursuing love, but she was afraid that Poplar Fruit didn't even have the most basic trust in her. Poplar Fruit's two short words, I believe, undoubtedly gave her the biggest support. After pondering for a moment, Zheng Yujie raised her head and seriously said to Poplar Fruit, I didn't lie to you. I didn't get engaged. This is the truth. But the childhood sweetheart that Timing told you about isn't without basis. Zheng Yujie laughed self-deprecatingly and said, the person he was talking about is Lisa Chow. He and I can't be considered childhood sweethearts, but because our families had a relationship in my grandfather's generation, we grew up together. But at that time, it was always me who beat him, and he was avoiding me, but now, you can see it. He's pestering you? Poplar Fruit frowned and asked. He's pestering us about our engagement, Zheng Yujie said bluntly without hiding anything. Her beautiful red phoenix eyes looked at Poplar Fruit with sincerity. No matter how the willow tree beside her brushed her hair due to the spring breeze, she didn't move. Engagement? Poplar Fruit asked in surprise. Zheng Yujie said with a helpless face. Yes, it's the kind of engagement that should have been buried with the old era. Before I was born, his grandpa and my grandpa had already decided on it. Is it a political marriage? Poplar Fruit frowned and asked. I guess so. Will you look down on me because of this? Zheng Yujie once again asked Poplar Fruit with apprehension. Look down on you? How could I? Poplar Fruit shook his head and said, This isn't your fault. Living in a big family, you have no choice. Not to mention you, my mother often asks me to go on blind dates. It's so annoying. I have to find excuses every time. 2 years ago, the Leaf family brought up the engagement again. Zheng Yujie continued, My grandfather almost wanted to marry me off, but in the end, Zheng Yujie slyly smiled and said, During the engagement ceremony, I caused a ruckus and the engagement was left unsettled. So, I'm not engaged to him at all. So what Zheng Timing said to me was a misunderstanding? Poplar Fruit laughed. Wrong. He's just bullshitting. Zheng Yujie said firmly. He must have seen me walking so close to you and wanted to tell some lies to scare you away. It's just that this lie is half true and half false, and you mistook it for the truth." Poplar Fruit awkwardly scratched his head and said, "Sorry, it's my fault. I don't want to marry Lisa Chow. That's because he's too effeminate, and I've never liked him. I like you, not because I want to use you as a shield. Do you understand? What I love is you, your heart in Red City, your charm when you concentrate on learning," Zheng Yujie said affectionately. "I know." Poplar Fruit felt a bit of a headache, and also a bit confused. He really wanted to look at Kiki, because if he didn't understand, he could look around and didn't have to use his brain to reply. "Your family will definitely not agree." Poplar Fruit scratched his head and said, "I'm not afraid." Zheng Yujie's voice became more and more affectionate. She gritted her teeth and said, "Even if the whole world opposes it, so what? I love you. No one can stop us from being together." Listening to Zheng Yujie's passionate confession, Poplar Fruit's heart couldn't help but waver. His mind was already filled with emotions, but he was still struggling. Humans were not plants. It was impossible for him not to have the feeling that Zheng Yujie gave him. However, it seemed that this feeling was more physical than emotional. This was what Poplar Fruit couldn't figure out. He wasn't sure if he liked Zheng Yujie or not. There seemed to be two little people fighting in his head. One of them was telling Poplar Fruit to accept Zheng Yujie. The girl had already gone to this extent. What more did he want? However, the other little man told Poplar Fruit to calm down and think carefully about who he loved. At this moment, the figure of a person suddenly appeared in his mind that had been messed up by Zheng Yujie, the graceful girl with long hair and a light skirt by the summer lake. Yes, Poplar Fruit actually thought of another girl in such a situation. However, he didn't want to blame himself at this time. His chaotic state of mind became even more chaotic, and finally, it became clearer and clearer. In his eyes, the bits and pieces of his interactions with Fong Bei in the past year flashed past. That girl ran over in the middle of winter. She would rather freeze in the cold wind than trouble Poplar Fruit to come down and pick her up. That girl even rushed out the cards that the two of them had worked together overnight before he left for America. She didn't forget to remind Poplar Fruit to keep his half well. That girl who helped him take care of Kiki at home when he was out on business and had cooked for him and waited for him to come back. Fong Bei's naivety, Fong Bei's kindness, Fong Bei's optimism, her every frown and smile were deeply imprinted in Poplar Fruit's mind. Moreover, he was even more infatuated with the feeling of home that the small teacher's apartment gave him. In those warm images, there was him, Kiki, and Fong Bei. Poplar Fruit felt a trace of sweetness in his heart, but he quickly suppressed it. This was not the right time. Zheng Yujie looked at the struggle on Poplar Fruit's face and felt quite uncomfortable. Although she didn't have the ability to read minds and couldn't see through Poplar Fruit's thoughts with a woman's sixth sense, Zheng Yujie felt that Poplar Fruit was thinking of another girl. "Yujie, Poplar Fruit hesitated and considered his words. "Is it because of Fong Bei? Is that her name?" Zheng Yujie suddenly pursed her lips and said, Poplar Fruit was stunned, but his "how did you know?" expression told Zheng Yujie that she guessed correctly. Zheng Yujie gently smiled and said, "Do you think Lisa Chow would just give me the photos so easily? If he didn't do some additional research, how could I believe it?" Poplar Fruit was silent. "When we came, I knew that your feelings for that girl were not as simple as friends." Zheng Yujie sighed and said, "I think Duan Xueqing should also be able to tell from the photos. I'm just not like her. I haven't given up. I still want to fight for it." Zheng Yujie's eyes were suddenly filled with tears. This was never seen from her. Zheng Yujie didn't know how many years it had been since she shed tears. Seeing Zheng Yujie, who had always been strong, shed tears, Poplar Fruit's heart suddenly felt sad, just like when Lu Yunran left him. "Papa, Annie's crying," Kiki said in surprise. "Is Annie not obedient?" She pulled Poplar Fruit's sleeve and said seriously, "Kiki is very obedient. Kiki, don't cry. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.